We would like to call the September 14th meeting of the Planning and Traffic Commission meeting to order. And we'd like to also note that everybody is present here tonight. And with that, we're going to go right into our pledge that will be led by Commissioner Armando.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, so we have a consent calendar tonight. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve the consent calendar.
I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any questions? Hearing none, let's vote. All right, so now we would go to public comments, and I know I went a little off record there. Are there any public comments tonight?
Yes, there is. Frank Denny.
And if your item is on the agenda, then you would want to wait until that time, Mr. Denning. What did you want to speak to the commission tonight about? Probably, are you on the Normandale issue? Well, do you mind? And we'll because I think a lot of your neighbors are going to speak on the same issue. And if you don't mind waiting, we'll...
I don't mind. I just didn't see an agenda that I could look at in terms of what's on today.
Are there no agendas on that little wall right there? You know, we are right in the middle of getting new staff, so maybe that's why.
I put some there.
Oh, there was some there. There's an overflow crowd tonight? We usually have about 2, 1. So, anyway, we apologize. But maybe you guys can pass the agenda around or just follow along. It's pretty easy. So, we would now go into our first item.
There's one more.
Oh, we have one more.
Sharon Holmes.
Same thing, Sharon?
It's less than 3 minutes if you want me to just say it, sit down.
If you're not on the agenda, I would love that. So,
I am not on the agenda.
so what we would want you to do is to state your name and your city of residence and limit yourself to 3 minutes. So thank you.
It'll be under 3. My name is Sharon Holmes. I'm a resident of Lake Forest. I'm here representing the single-family homes that are along Palmwood in the Serrano Highlands Master Association. And I wanted to thank you for the time you allowed us last 2 weeks ago when you had your meeting to present our concerns. That was on August 24th. And I believe it was Doug Anderson. I don't see him here this evening, so I'm not sure if that name is correct. And we were pleased to hear him report that many of the issues that we had brought up in our presentation had already started to be worked on based on our presentation to City Council. And we've seen a lot less trash. As a matter of fact, Saturday morning I saw a gentleman and 2 kids walking up Palmwood with trash bags. I don't know if that was part of your committee or just a concerned person that was out there doing what we all probably
I sent my
should have been doing.
kids.
You did? Okay, great. And a lot of towed away and things like that, so we're very pleased that progress is made. The 2 questions that I've been asked from several neighbors is what I'm coming here to ask tonight. It's once you've done your research regarding one of the listed concerns or suggestions we provided, how do we get the results of your findings and action plan? Are we privy, first of all, to have that information? Does your committee contact your neighborhood liaison, or do we request the information? And secondly, what is the proper amount of time that you need to investigate, research, determine if you are going to implement changes, can't implement the change, so on and so forth? Thank you.
I'm just going to pause for a minute and ask staff. She obviously has a couple of questions, and it's not on the agenda, which typically we can't comment on, but maybe Gail can comment.
No, actually, I'd like Dave Rogers to comment. I think since we have other people interested in similar things, a little explanation of how our process works would be beneficial for all.
And this would be the right timing on that?
Yes, we could do that.
All right, Mr. Rogers. all you.
Just briefly, we are in contact with the primary representative from the neighborhood. In fact, we just exchanged emails a couple of days ago, kind of a status report as to where we're at on their particular item. In terms of how much time we think it's going to take, it kind of depends on what we find. We're still in kind of the investigative stage right now, contacting the HOAs from the multifamilies in the area, doing some analysis. So we intend to keep in touch with the primary representative, but we'll obviously, if anybody else wants to be added on that email list, but we've kind of been working with the primary contact for the group at this point. So we'll continue to do so and keep them updated. As our resident noted, we've already done a couple of things in terms of research. We've got our crews out there doing some cleanup, and of course Brad and his team are doing their part for us also. So.
Okay. Curious if maybe you could ask your primary contact if he has email addresses from the other folks that were here and interested parties that, because we're not going to give out his email address, and but maybe he might be able to reach out to his neighbors and ask if they want to be on that chain, or how is he disseminating the information? Can you kind of take the run on that?
Yes, I'll work with her on that. In response to my last email that she was going to share that information with others in the group, so I'm not quite sure how far that's been disseminated.
Okay. Kind of answer your question then? Thank you. All right. Are there any more public comments? No? All right, thank you. All right, so we will move along to agenda item number 2.
Agenda item 2, use permit for alcohol sales for off-site consumption and a request for determination of public convenience and necessity. And Amy Stonich has a report this evening.
Good evening, Chair and members of the Commission. This proposal is a use permit for alcohol sales for off-site consumption with a request for determination of public convenience or necessity, or PCN as we call it, for a grocery outlet bargain market. The applicant proposes to occupy the tenant space formerly occupied by Fresh and Easy at 22475 El Toro Road. The grocery outlet sells a variety of general merchandise and groceries. The market serves clientele of cost-conscious shoppers. As proposed, beer and wine would be displayed for purchase on shelves located centrally in the aisles of the store. The total display area comprises 4% of the 16,070 square foot tenant space. No hard alcohol would be sold and no alcoholic beverages would be served or consumed on-site. In 2015, the City Council adopted the policy for the review of requests for alcohol sales for off-site consumption and determination of requests for public convenience and necessity. One of the standard conditions set forth in the policy is that it is prohibited to sell, display, store refrigerated alcoholic beverages. The applicant, however, has indicated that they would like to remove this condition so that they may sell cold alcoholic beverages. Pursuant to the city's policy, the application was reviewed by the Chief of Police Services, who prepared a report and implemented all standard conditions applicable for the Planning Commission consideration. Among other things, the report indicates that there were no alcohol violations of law in the corresponding census tract in 2016 calendar year. The determination was also made that issuance of the requested ABC license would not trigger a need for increased law enforcement services or contribute to an existing law enforcement problem in the area. Other pertinent factors and considerations outlined in the staff report, including the findings that the proposed use is consistent with the general plan and zoning ordinance, that the grocery outlet has been designed in a manner that is consistent with the requirements of alcohol sales for off-site consumption and is compatible with surrounding uses, and that the use would provide a public convenience or necessity in that the business is a full-service grocery store which many customers use for one-stop shopping, and that as a result, the addition of beer and wine sales would provide a certain level of convenience for customers. Staff is recommending approval of the use permit and the PCN determination. based on the application's consistency with the city's guidelines and the findings included in the draft resolutions before you. To date, no public comments have been received regarding this item. Thank you for your consideration. This concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and the applicant is here, as well as Lieutenant Valentine, able to answer any questions you may have regarding this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy. Does anybody have any questions of staff? Okay. So, Tom does.
On that 4%, what percentage of that 4% is going to be refrigerated?
That might be a question we could pose to the applicant. The plans had indicated that they were all in the aisle. It didn't clearly indicate the refrigerated portion, but they may have come to a conclusion on how much they would like to refrigerate from there.
When's the appropriate time to talk about that condition number 9?
I think probably we'll hear from the applicant, and then
All right.
unless you have any questions of, say, Lieutenant Valentine with regards to condition number 9, or of staff, because this would be the time to ask staff questions.
Okay, condition number 9.
Do you want to clarify that for
Oh, yeah.
members of
the does not permit the refrigeration of beer, basically. And I recall going to Fresh and Easy, and they used to stock my favorite beer there. And you could.
You don't
buy
like it warm?
Well, you could buy it warm if you didn't need it cold, or you could buy it cold, and that seemed to work quite well. And I don't understand why we are prohibiting refrigeration of that, because it's like a grocery store. We're not talking about a gas station or something like that. I don't know the origin of that, but I was hoping the commission would discuss that item by itself.
Well, I think we're going to discuss it. I mean, that's on my mind as well. Maybe we'll just take it right now to Lieutenant Valentine, and I think that you actually checked the box. You checked the box.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, as we prepare the PCN, Police Services, we go through this report. We look at numerous things. We look at crimes within that internal reporting district, crimes in the shopping center, calls for service, and we try to gauge if there's any current problems or trends in the area we need to be concerned with. None of those issues came up for this shopping center. However, as I looked at the history of other type of grocery outlets, mainly the 99-cent stores that we've had, that condition was checked in all of those types of stores. Being that this is a new policy, I check those conditions and leave it to the Planning Commission to remove if they.
Very safe. But that's your job, right? Okay. Does anybody have any more questions of staff at this time? All right. Then I think we should hear from the applicant. And that would be, Katie, I don't know your last name, but you'll say your name and city.
I will. My name is Katie Shard, and I am from Roseville, California, and I am representing Grocery Outlet tonight. I do have Roger Curtis and Tanaz Hagayeg with me. They do work with Grocery Outlet and can answer some of the more specific questions that Commissioner Ludden had, for example, regarding the percentage of the chilled beer and wine at the new Grocery Outlet. Yes, we are okay with all of the conditions of approval except for number 9. And I'd like to respond to one of the comments that you just made with regard to 99-cent clearance center. I believe that was the first store that went through your process with your new ordinance. And 99-cent clearance center doesn't have chilled beer wine in their business model. So if the box was checked, they wouldn't have had an issue with it because they compete in the discount variety category. They do have grocery items, but they are not a grocery store. Grocery Outlet competes in the supermarket grocery store category, which, as you had indicated, it is customary, if not mandatory, for the customers to find chilled beer and wine when they shop. If they don't find the chilled beer and wine, they will simply stop shopping there. They won't make two trips. They won't buy the chilled beer and wine at another location after having shopped at Grocery Outlet. So it would be a huge disadvantage to this new store that is making a significant investment in your community to not have some chilled beer and wine. I did drive around to your other grocery stores and look to see what they had. And I do understand that these stores were permitted prior to your ordinance. But I think it might be helpful to just look and discuss the quantity of chilled beer and wine at the other grocery stores in Lake Forest. So Stater Brothers, which is not on your report but is across the street, has 36 doors of chilled beer and wine. Each door is about 28 inches, which is 84 feet of chilled beer and wine. The Albertsons has approximately 56 feet of chilled beer and wine. They don't have doors. They have an open case, which is similar to what Grocery Outlet is proposing. However, in the case of Grocery Outlet, we're asking for 12 feet. You have 84 feet at Stater Brothers on aisle 2 and 56 feet in Albertsons. So it does seem to make sense based on your own grocery stores. I looked at CVS and Walgreens too, but those are drugstores. And they had 2 doors at Walgreens, 3 doors at CVS. So the CVS had about 9 feet. Walgreens had about 6 to 7 feet. So we're not asking for much more than what even your drugstores have here in this city, but nowhere even near what the Stater Brothers and the Albertsons have. So to be very specific, to answer your question, we calculated the amount of chilled beer and wine in the beer wine section at the Grocery Outlet, and it's about 8% of the total alcoholic beverages.
I'm sorry,
8.
8 for
Eight.
Grocery Outlet.
8% of the alcoholic beverage section is chilled.
Okay. And the section in the totality of the store is
Is 3.9.
3.9.
Correct. Right.
Did you get a sense of what the other 2 stores that you?
Well, their footprint is bigger. It might have been comparable. I did not, because I don't know the total square footage of those stores, but they are much bigger footprints. Grocery Outlet operates in a smaller 15 to 20,000 square foot footprint, whereas Stater Brothers and Albertsons are more in the 50,000 square foot range. So it isn't unusual to see the larger aisles in those bigger stores, and what we're asking for is probably comparable on a percentage basis, although that's completely at the. So, you know, I know the ordinance is new, and I'm trying to figure it out myself. Having been here when this was discussed, I can only read your ordinance to see what perhaps you intended. And when I read the ordinance, the final pages at the very top say potential conditions. So if you look at your own ordinance, attachment 1 is a list of potential conditions of approval. No one would read this and think these are standard conditions of approval, yet that is what I heard here tonight, that these are standard. But at the same time, I heard from Lieutenant Valentine that there's really no nexus. There's no reason to check some of these boxes. So while we are willing to agree to almost all of them, except the one about the chilled beer and wine, I just wanted to point that out, that your own ordinance does say potential conditions of approval, which means it's really the city's burden to prove that that should be a condition of approval to the project, which I don't think has been made in this case. So I am available and Tanaz.
Any questions of our applicant? Tom does.
I'm a little confused on the floor plan that you submitted of exactly how that refrigerated section works. It looks like there's one long row of wine case. It looks like it borders on aisle 6. And then you've got this, what they call alcohol sales aisle 5. I'm taking it that the 12 feet of beer case, that's what's in the lower left-hand corner of your area?
Could I show you a photograph? Can we pass
Yes.
this around?
Absolutely. The drawing's kind of confusing. That's why I'm trying to understand exactly what's going on
I
here.
agree. It is where their beer and wine is, their chilled beer wine aisle. It's the same type of shelving unit, if you will. It's a chilled case. So that case in that first picture is about 12 feet wide. So that would be at the within that aisle, and then there would be just your traditional.
Yeah, typically, we prefer to see that alcohol more towards the rear of the store than what we see here, because right now it looks like,
I'm sorry, Tom, is that your opinion, or is that, you said we?
well, it's my opinion.
Thank you.
But in the past, that has been an issue.
I don't know that for sure, so,
Thank you. Anyway, it looks like it's right, basically positioned right behind the checkout.
We have modified the location of the beer and wine to satisfy staff. We were asked to put it there.
What's your criteria, Amy, for that one?
There is a condition, and it is standard. We did talk to the applicant. They moved it from the original proposal, which was right at the front door, to this location. However, the clarification of where it was refrigerated or not was not considered because we put the condition that it could not be refrigerated.
So assuming that, let's go back for a minute. Assuming we took condition 9 out of there, would you still allow it to be in the same location?
Typically, we've asked them to leave it away from the front door. They did move it away from the front door. The intent of that is so that the cashiers can keep an eye on it and make sure that nobody walks out the front door with this. This would satisfy that need.
There's no way to grab something through the back. It doesn't look like there's any easy access out the back either, so that would be another quick condition. Okay. All right, that answers my question. Thank you.
okay, does anybody have any more questions of our applicant? All right, hearing none, thank you. And do we have any more speakers on this? No more speakers. Okay, so we're going to bring it back up to ourselves. And does anybody have any comment on this? Dave?
Yeah, I'll jump in. It was a question I had also, and I picked up on the potential comment. So I couldn't see anything that made a connection between why the determination was there for no chilled beverages, where there didn't seem to be any connexus whatsoever between any incident that was in the area. It's not oversaturated or anything of that nature. So I see no reason for condition 9 to be there, personally.
Yeah, and I would tend to agree with that. It's, all the other stores are pretty much the same, so that keeps it in line with a grocery store type thing, so I would agree.
I also favor the exclusion of that condition.
And one of the other things that I make in conjunction with that is when you do the PCN determination, this is of convenience. Okay, and that's part of one of the determining factors.
Warm beer is not convenient for you?
No. Warm wine is not either, and frankly, I would probably consume warm wine whether I would consume warm beer. But we've posted at the facility. There's no alcohol consumption in the area, which is a standard condition of all of them. This is a grocery store, primarily. You're looking at less than, oh my God, 4% of 3.9% is just minuscule. So I think the primary thing right now is make the PCN determination as to whether or not we can make that additional finding, and then be my personal recommendation that we remove condition number 9.
And I would just like to add that I think that if we were to keep condition number 9, and I really do appreciate staff's kind of maybe erring on the side of caution with this, because it is our first real grocery store other than the 99-cent store with the new ordinance that the City Council passed. But I think that if we were to put condition 9 in on this PCN, I think we would tell every grocery store out there, don't come to Lake Forest because we're not going to, we don't believe in your business. So with that, if there's no other comments or questions, I'd like to call for a motion.
First, I think we have to acknowledge that there is a PCN determination. We have to make at least one determination in order to facilitate that. Number 1 and number 4 fit the bill. So I think those will permit the PCN to be considered. And with that, I would make the motion to accept it and to have condition 9 removed as part of the motion.
I'll second that motion.
Did I not do that right? Do they have to do them separately?
No, it's fine to do it together, but if you could also close the public hearing.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to do that last time. And close the public hearing. Okay.
I second that motion, and I believe it's findings 1 and 4.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. Motion carries. Welcome, Grocery Outlet. Thank you. All right, so we are going to entertain a motion to look at item 5 before we go into our training, because we have a lot of residents here for item 5. Any time entertaining a motion?
I'll second that.
It wasn't a motion. I was entertaining one. We don't. Tom's making the motion to bump up number 5.
I'll second.
And it's been seconded. You want to third it? Yeah. Okay. So it's been moved and seconded to move item 5 to our next item, and let's vote. Okay, that motion carries, which gives us the opportunity to give you guys the opportunity to go home earlier rather than later. So with that, we'll open the public hearing for item number 5, that is now item number 3.
Actually, Chairman, it's a discussion item, and we have Dave Rogers here this evening. The item is entitled Discussion of Traffic Conditions on Normandale Drive and Regency Lane. I believe Dave has a staff presentation on this.
Short presentation. We realize this is somewhat of an information gathering part for both staff and the commission. So just to give you a little bit of background here, as we talk about in the report, on Friday, August 25th, there was a traffic collision on Countryside Drive at Normandale Drive. And in response to this collision, residents in the area attended the September 5th City Council meeting to express their concerns about the overall traffic conditions in the area. The City Council referred this matter to the Planning and Traffic Commission for further review and recommendations. The City Council directed staff to agendize an item for the meeting tonight so that the Planning and Traffic Commission could gather information and direct staff as appropriate. Real quick here, since this is the first time that the Planning and Traffic Commission is reviewing a neighborhood traffic safety issue, staff thought it would be appropriate to provide the Planning and Traffic Commission with information on how the city typically handles these types of requests. As you noted, the other item tonight is about parking-related requests. This is about traffic safety, the two most common requests for assistance that we receive in our traffic engineering group. Generally, these types of issues are handled at staff level, but in this case, the Planning and Traffic Commission will actually be asked to review this. But for the most part, they're usually handled at staff level, but occasionally come back to the Planning and Traffic Commission and even the City Council in some cases. Every situation is unique, and so staff uses its knowledge and experience to determine what data is necessary and or useful in each situation. Once findings and conclusions are reached, then staff will determine if steps should be considered to address the concerns. A review of neighborhood traffic safety issues can include a number of approaches and techniques. It includes field reviews, what we've done in the past or past city practice, any number of traffic studies, including speed studies, volume studies, collision analysis, warrant studies if we're considering installing specific types of traffic control devices like stop signs or traffic signals, and even some special studies, things that we don't use very often, but license plate surveys to to help determine specific traffic patterns, turn movement count studies at intersections. That's just a sampling of some of the studies and some of the things that we'll do in response to these types of concerns. As far as the schedule goes, again, each one is unique. It kind of depends on how many of those types of studies we think are appropriate. I don't want to scare anybody in the audience, but sometimes these can take as little as a few days, up to maybe a year, depending on how complex and the things that we're proposing to change. Again, we might have to come back to Planning and Traffic Commission, City Council, back and forth. The concerns that we've heard from the council level are fairly typical, so I obviously wouldn't expect us to be anywhere near that year time frame, but we've already passed a few days. So it's likely to take a few months for us to kind of go through this, gather data. Some of these studies will require hiring of consultants to bring them in so that we can gather an appropriate data and come back with some conclusions and recommendations. So we just want to give you a very brief kind of, that's how we look at these types of traffic studies. I know Chief Valentine would probably like to give just a little bit of information on the collision that kind of resulted in the conversation tonight, and I'd like to turn it over to him.
Thanks, Dave. Once again, Madam Chair and Commissioners, as was explained in the council meeting last week, this collision was although the investigation is still ongoing, what we had here was somebody driving at a high rate of speed, and that was under the influence. And I don't have a speed factor yet or any of that. That's still, once again, under investigation. But those two factors are the main factors that caused this collision. The vehicle left the roadway, went down the embankment into like a concrete culvert, which gave the tires traction, and the vehicle kept going. It hit the end of that culvert and launched over that, went end over end and into the garage of the house, and then caught fire. Because of the unique batteries in a Tesla vehicle, those caught fire, and they were extremely difficult to extinguish. It took, I think it was around 7 hours to extinguish that. And even once they had the car removed and on the tow truck, the car reignited. So it's a very hot fire. And I'm not going to even pretend to be a fireman and explain all that type of dynamics, but that's the basic collision. So there's multiple investigations taking place right now. You have the Sheriff's Department investigation, and now just last week a representative from Tesla came out, as well as NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board. So there's kind of multiple jurisdictions and investigations occurring. The Sheriff's Department has obtained the, for lack of a better term, the memory chip or computer chip from the vehicle through a search warrant, and we have released that to NTSB so they can work with Tesla to download that, as we did not have the equipment. It's a proprietary type equipment. But once all these investigations are complete, we hope to have the answers that everybody wants or is looking for as to what truly caused the collision, if there's anything more to that besides speed and under the influence. And the driver was arrested for driving under the influence.
Question.
The speed limit on Normandale, is it posted or is it residential 25? Do you know?
It's considered a collector street, so not a true residential street, so we have to do a survey in order to establish the speed limit. The speed limit is posted at 35.
And then I would assume that the countryside, I'm sorry, that's a not posted, so it's considered a 25 mile an hour.
Traditional residential street, prima facie 25, correct.
Thanks.
I have a question. On Normandy, those are raised curbs, right? They're not-
Correct. It's a classic street with raised curbs on either side. When I was out there today, you can see the strike marks where the vehicle left the roadway. There's very distinct strike marks and chips in the curb. So unfortunately, that typical curb was not enough to keep this on the roadway.
Okay. And can you estimate what the percent of grade is on Normandy there? 4% or something like that?
I'd probably put it around that. I got a street in mind that I know is 10. It's nowhere near that, so maybe half of it.
It appears that there's no physical elements that could have contained that situation.
Typical roadway, and based on the general information we have from the Sheriff's Department as to what the vehicle was doing, none of the things that are constructed with a typical street could have and would have kept that vehicle on.
We're in general session now, or
You know, this is our
I'll
first
wait.
discussion. We're just going to wing it, so
I'll wait
yes.
for general discussion.
I think we're in general discussion, aren't we? It's all a discussion item.
Well, we had a staff presentation, we still have public comments, and then, so up to you if you want to discuss now or hear from the public, and then continue a discussion with Mr. Rogers.
All right, let's take public comments. Unless you wanted, are you good?
No, I'd like to, once the public comments are concluded, then jump in on what,
All right,
I haven't come up with.
thank you, Dave. All right,
Patrick Feldy.
Feldy. And again, I would just remind us that our name and significance.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, my name is Patrick Feldy, and I'm reside in Lake Forest. I'm also a member, I reside in, excuse me, the Montberry Homeowners Association. My business is in Lake Forest. I'm a commercial property owner in Lake Forest. The point being is that I'm well invested in the city of Lake Forest. I wanted to make that point, and I heard, the earlier comments about the studies and you're going to bring in experts. I've done my own informal study over the past 21 years. I travel through that particular part of Normandale probably 2 to 4 times a day for 21 years. And I can tell you that if you're moving through that particular piece of Normandale, Vista Estates and Regency, you better have your A game with you, because the cars come down there fast. There probably hasn't been a week that goes by where I haven't experienced cars coming down Normandale faster than 35 miles per hour. And once, even if you look both ways and you proceed to make a left or a right on Normandale, cars come out of nowhere and they're coming fast. And like I said, you better have your A game, and you better be prepared to punch the accelerator to get out of their way. So I just want to emphasize that point. Don't spend too much money on those studies and those experts, because the informal studies have already been done. Thank you.
And I think I'd just like to clarify, thank you, Mr. Feldy, that we haven't specifically said that there will be studies. That's something that typically the City Council would have to do. So although it was mentioned that it could be, we didn't say that it would be. So next.
Okay. Bill LaFave.
Bill LaFave. I, too, live in the Montberry area of Lake Forest. And we've had several accidents at the intersections of Normandale and Countryside, Normandale and Vista, and Normandale and El Toro in the past year or two, most recently on August 25th, partially destroying a home as well as personal and community property. We have seen large increases in traffic after homes on Osterman were built, then even more after the condos on Osterman, and then even more after Parkside homes were built. Cumulatively, the traffic increases have been dramatic as drivers try to get to El Toro Road as fast as they can, and they use Normandale as a shortcut of choice. The recent incident at Countryside is at least the 3rd time that a car has created damage to that particular property due to speed, and clearly demonstrates the need for speed controls. Several cars have failed to stop at Regency in Normandale, resulting in them driving onto our association common area, and once took out our irrigation controller. We requested and received a T intersection study, which seems to have helped to some extent. But high speed on Regency also remains a problem. In addition, the increase in high-density housing in our area has created severe parking issues on Osterman, and as it is now lined with cars, as is Normandale. In addition, it has created increased cut-through lanes on Vista Estate, Montberry Drive, Regency, Midcrest, and Pittsford. People trying to turn left from Countryside and Vista onto Normandale have a very dangerous situation because of the speeds of vehicles from both directions on Normandale. Typically, when cars come off of El Toro at 65 or whatever they're traveling, and they turn left on Normandale, they think it's a continuation of a raceway, and they charge up that hill very quickly. On August 31st, a portable speed detection unit was placed on Normandale, and within 6 hours, a vehicle struck the unit, turning it around and tipping it over. I think the lieutenant could talk about that. There are hills and severe curves on Normandale, making this small street more dangerous than most other small neighborhood streets. In addition to a traffic study, I think that traffic calming, similar to Pittsford, should be done on Normandale, as well as stop signs on Normandale, west of Regency, and east of Vista Estate. I also request that the speed limit on El Toro Road between Portola and Northcrest be reduced to 50 miles an hour. Due to excessive speed and the high number of speed-related accidents and fatalities, the speed limit on El Toro Road west of Northcrest is already at 50 miles an hour. Lastly, I feel that the proposed addition of 800 or 900 additional high-density housing units across from Home Depot would significantly increase traffic on our local streets, and Normandale certainly can't handle any more traffic than it already has.
I'm sorry, but you're getting maybe beyond your time, and if I give you more time, I have to give everybody more time. Can you wrap it up?
Yeah. We ask for your help.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Weaver?
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Cheryl Weaver, and I am a resident of Lake Forest, living near El Toro Road in Normandale, also on Countryside Drive. My husband and I have owned our home here in Lake Forest for 30 years. Almost 3 weeks ago, again, as you've heard, on Friday, August 25th, a shocking accident occurred at the end of our street on the corner of Normandale and Countryside, just a few yards from El Toro Road. Basically, as you've heard, a Tesla was coming down the hill on Normandale at a high rate of speed, hit the curb before Countryside, went airborne, and landed in the garage of our good friends and neighbors on the corner, barely missing the husband who had just backed his Subaru out of his garage and onto the driveway. The Tesla pushed the other car housed in the garage, as well as the refrigerator, through the wall and into the house. The car then caught fire, as you've also heard, spread through the garage and the attic, destroying everything in those areas. Luckily, firefighters were able to keep the fire from totally destroying the whole house. By the grace of God, the homeowner was able to get his wife and dog out of the house. There were no bicyclists riding by, no joggers in the direct path, no children out playing in any of the yards, no horseback riders coming down the trails, no cars turning left across the path of the airborne car, and no dogs and their owners out for their typical evening walks or runs, which would have been me. No lives were lost that night, but havoc was caused by this accident. The victims' next-door neighbors, 2 adults and 3 children, had to vacate their house for safety purposes. At least 2 neighbors risked bodily injury to assist the driver and his passenger, and everyone on our block, as well as across Normandale and across El Toro Road, were inhaling smoke from the fire for hours afterwards. Even the following Wednesday after that, there was smoke in the air when I left for work that day. Everyone in our neighborhood has been affected. All of the neighborhoods around Regency, Normandale, near El Toro Road, and across have been affected. And this is just, as Bill said, one of 3 which have taken place in this same area over the last 3 or 4 months. And the key word or problem that we all see is speed. This cannot happen again. Those of us living in the area of El Toro Road, Regency, and Normandale in every direction want your help. We need to have traffic slowed down on Normandale and on Regency. We would like a permanent electronic your speed reminder board on Normandale and some speed bumps to slow traffic as they come down the hill. On El Toro Road, the racing and speeding of cars has increased every year, and it is not uncommon to be awakened by speeding, gunning of cars, near-miss accidents and spin-outs, and actual accidents starting around 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and sometimes earlier, and lasting at least through 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning on any given day. Having an officer assigned to drive through or be positioned in this area at specific times would be optimal in discouraging and deterring this type of behavior. For the safety of Lake Forest residents in our area, we ask that you take action immediately. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anil Patel.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Commissioners, community leaders, and fellow neighbors. Like some of the neighbors...
My name is...
I'm sorry, thank you, yes. My name is Anil Patel, and like some of my fellow neighbors, I lived in Lake Forest for about 8 years. My wife has lived here longer, about 40 years. We've got 2 kids, a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old who go to school here also, and we're also business owners in the community, so we're fully vested in Lake Forest. I'd like to speak to the incident that occurred at my property on Canterbury Lane about a year ago. I had a vehicle crash into my block wall about 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning last summer. It left a 12 or 15-foot gash in my block wall, as well as about 10-foot gaping hole in my neighbor's block wall. Regency is at a slightly higher elevation than Canterbury, so our properties are slightly lower, so the backyards are actually below grade, if you will, compared to Regency. So we're always living in fear that this incident will happen again. Another speeding car will lose control, crash into the block wall. This time it'll be daytime. We'll be sitting in the backyard, kids will be playing, and we'll have concrete blocks falling onto us and seriously injuring somebody. So that's a fear we live with continuously after this has happened. It's a constant reminder that it's possible it can happen again. I came here from Normandale on Regency. There was about 6 intersections where there are no stop signs. So these are all feeder streets that feed onto Regency, not a single stop sign. And then there's a 7th street, that's more of a commercial street, before you get to Lake Forest. So there's 6 access roads or residential roads that feed into Regency, but not a single stop sign. So people who aren't residents of the community see Regency as almost like a shortcut from Normandale to Lake Forest. They know there's not a stop sign, they're speeding through there. So our bedroom on the 2nd floor can hear all the noise coming off of Regency at night. There's a lot of cars revving up and speeding because they know there's not a single stop sign on the entire stretch of Regency. So just looking for the panel here to provide solutions, whether it be some of the ideas that my fellow neighbors have mentioned, whether it be stop signs, speed signs, speed indicator markers, so people are aware of the situation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thomas Mundell.
Thank you. My name's Mundell. Lake Forest. Been living in Lake Forest for 37 years. Lived in Montberry for 30 years. And I just wanted to follow suit with what some of my neighbors said. I won't be redundant and take a lot of time. You've all heard our concerns. But I will tell you, to address your question, Commissioner, you asked about the grade of Normandale. The grade isn't the issue. 4% going downhill in a straight line wouldn't be an issue. It's the 4% and the curve and the speed and the reckless driving that all combine together. Mr. Seger, who lived in the home that the Tesla crashed into, it's the 3rd incident that I'm aware of in probably the last 10 years where a car has ended up in his front yard or this time in his garage. So it is a problem. The design of the street is a flaw. I realize you probably can't do anything about that. At 35, it's probably very safe. At 55 on a Saturday night, with or without alcohol, it's not safe. I will tell you that I walk my 3-year-old grandson with the dog in the trails behind our house. We come out onto Normandale. I am seriously concerned and fearful when I walk up Normandale on the south side of the street because the cars come so fast. I would, let me see. I'll just repeat everything everybody else said. I mean, you can't pull out of Regency onto Normandale without fear of getting hit. You can't pull onto Normandale off a Countryside, the street I live on, without fear of getting hit. The gentleman mentioned you got to be on your A game. You better be on your A game, because by the time you look right, by the time you look left, by the time you start to pull out, the guy from the right it's just coming so fast. So thank you for your time, and I appreciate anything you guys can do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we have another speaker. Jamie, you're next.
Good evening. I'm James Matthews. I'm a resident of Lake Forest at 21491 Montberry. And I've lived in Lake Forest for now 23 years, Montberry for 3, and happen to be a registered professional civil engineer for those 23 years, and practice in several states. So I guess I just wanted to give my personal opinion and probably professional opinion about that intersection there on Normandale, in that it's not a typical T intersection, because you have 2 T's that are kind of back to back, and that's really creating a lot of cross traffic. And then on top of that, you have the high rate of speed. So I believe that the street is designed appropriately for the speed limit that's posted. It's not a 50-mile-an-hour zone, a 35-mile-an-hour zone. If we all maintained our speed, then I believe the street would keep the cars on the road. However, obviously that's not occurring, and we need to. I hope that this committee will recommend that the city staff pursue additional studies to determine what to do. I personally believe that 2 stop signs, one placed at the downhill before Regency and on the uphill before Vista Estate, would be an appropriate response to this. It would slow traffic coming down the hill, as well as reduce speed and allow the cross traffic to make it through the intersections. So, thank you.
Thank you. And I think we have the most patient speaker next.
Frank Denny.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and other commissioners on the staff. My name is Frank Denny. I've been a resident of Lake Forest for 30 years, and I'm not going to be redundant on what has been said. I think that you all got the message from that respect. But I think at a higher level, there needs to be more emphasis on solving traffic problems in the community, especially that particular area. Over time, you built a park that is at Parkside and Regency and did not provide parking for that park. Your answer to that was to stripe off areas, and little kids run back and forth across that street to get to that park. Some of them park in Parkside. You guys have made new stripes on Pittsford to allow parking for all of the overflow from the apartments. You've done the same thing on what used to be Kenyatta, bear with me, Osterman. And I think that as a commission and as a city council, you guys have taken the easy way out relative to managing parking. Another thing you need to do is put down no parking here to corner signs at intersections, because a lot of landscaping and individuals park very close to the corners, and you have to inch out to be able to see, even more so than those that have stop signs. And also, there's some reason that you allow people to sell their cars on the corners for freedom of speech. That's what I was told by the city council, which is an eyesore, but also a safety hazard. I've seen cars parked on Regency for sale. I called the city council, and they said the attorney for the city has stated unequivocally that it was decided that that was a freedom of speech issue, went away. I know other cities do it. And finally, if you're going to put up the speed indicators, maintain them. I don't know how many times I've called into the maintenance to have them fixed because they're flashing 60 when you're going 20, or they're flashing 20 when you're going 60. So that's my input to the council. I think you need a lot more attention relative to the entire area, not just because this car crashed into it. I think that it's an unfortunate situation, but that's only the tip of the iceberg relative to what needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so that would conclude our public speakers. So now we'll bring it back up to the dais, and Dave, you're first.
Okay, I'm a resident in Santa Rita Ridge, which is the association that's down below Montbury. I'd like to make one little clarification on the striping that's on Pittsford. The reason why that was placed there was Pittsford used to be 55 miles an hour, and we had that 85th percentile that the state imposes, that 85% of the people that go down the road will determine what the speed of the road is supposed to be. 20 years ago, Bob Woodings and I sat down. We were having the same type of a conversation with regard to that. Those stripes that are on that roadway, Pittsford, were placed there to constrict and be a calming on that roadway, which allowed us then to get down to 35 miles per hour. So when I went up this afternoon to drive Normandale, I went up there with the express purpose to see what I saw on the roadway itself from a driver's perspective. When I came going eastbound on Normandale, going up the hill, granted there are cars parked on both sides. They actually provide a traffic calming in that particular portion, both going up and to some extent coming down. Coming down is relative to the speed that they're coming up on the other side. When I got to the top at Barclay, that's where the parking ceases. And what happens at that point in time, going eastbound, which is going down the grade, it opens up and it's widened. Okay. The tendency is for myself, my perspective, was, oh, this is open field, I can increase my speed. So it may be a suggestion and possibility to even just to consider, one, monitor what the speed actually changes in that area to see whether the parking is reducing the speed, and consider a possibility of putting a stripe in there similar to what we did on Pittsford to make it appear as though that roadway is narrowing, which causes the person coming down to do it. It may work, it may not. It's not going to circumvent some guy in a Tesla, at 100 miles an hour going down. Nothing's going to prevent that. I mean, even on Pittsford, even now, it's that you cannot control. And I mean, you got people that are going to exceed the limit. But there are simple ways to do it. You can't put bumps on it. I don't know whether traffic signalization works. I do notice that it is posted. It's posted 35 as you're going eastbound from Osterman, going up. That's one sign. The other side is going westbound just as you come off of El Toro Road. When you get to the peak, it's almost as though it's a separate roadway. So there may be some consideration. My suggestion might be to put something up there similar to what they did on Regency as you come around the bend by the park with the traffic monitoring. It may not be effective. But the striping does help. On Regency, I noticed that as you make the turns going off of Regency, they've widened out the curb with the white stripes on the street. The people who are driving and attentive driving pay attention to them. It's a simple, easy thing to do. It may be beneficial, it may not, but it's something that we, tried relatively inexpensively and quickly. But that would be my suggestion. But I do know that downhill going eastbound from Regency down, there's a tendency there to pick up speed. And I think that's specifically where, and probably coming off of El Toro Road, I hadn't thought about it because they do come swinging off of that El Toro Road, a bat out of where. So I don't know how you slow that down, but it might be constricting that also. You got to slow that traffic down in that particular area, is my opinion.
It's, speed survey, if anything, might show a faster speed, so it wouldn't justify the 35-mile-an-hour speed, so I'm not quite sure, if in fact they're speeding like that. But Lieutenant, is it possible that we could have a sign, tell the motor cops maybe to be aware of the situation, maybe do some enforcement in there, some enforcement, can we maybe put that on their list of places they could check out?
Madam Chair and Commissioners, yes, we've already put that in place. In addition, we did put the radar trailer out there to try to monitor the speeds, and yes, it was hit about 6 hours later. And we picked that one up and put a second one out there to try to monitor those speeds and see what's happening in that roadway. But in addition to that, we've assigned the motor officers to be in that area as time allows. As you know, there's lots of hot spots throughout the city and different things, and motor officers also respond to traffic collisions and things like that. So unfortunately, they can't be there 100% of the time, but they are. It is now on their hot sheet, so to speak, to provide enforcement as time allows and be a presence.
And whether they are citing people or not, as it comes to the fact that they're there and people driving by has a deterrent that I've found to be the case. So, thanks.
This one's for staff and for the police services. Do we have an accident history for that neighborhood for the last couple of years?
We do. The department put together a quick summary of what we found out there, and let's see if I can find it here.
Dave is looking for that. Are there any other questions with maybe another staff member?
I'm pretty sure I brought it.
I hope you did. I don't have mine.
I've got the engineering traffic surveys for speed limits. I've got the radar trailer output. I probably left it on my desk. I remember. I'm going off. Having looked at it earlier, I think we had 6 in a 3-year period, and that counted the Tesla and the radar trailer.
Right. If I interject,
I'm sorry. What this was? Again, this is on Normandale.
On Normandale.
On Normandale.
Right. This is on Normandale between El Toro and Osterman. That's just strictly Normandale, not counting Regency or anywhere else. If I remember right, and forgive me if I'm off one or two, but it was about 6 collisions of reported collisions, right? Oftentimes there might be a collision. By the time we get there, there's no one there, or the parties choose not to report it because it's a minor collision, and they just exchange information and they leave. So from the documentation that the Sheriff's Department has, we had about 6 reported collisions in that area.
In the last
3 years.
3 years, and 2 of them were in the last
And 2 of them, one was the Tesla into the garage and one was the radar trailer.
We have data beyond that, but that's what the Orange County Sheriff's Department kind of ran as a first cut at it, the most current 3 years. We actually have data that goes back 10 years in another system that we just got recently, and I'm working to...
Of course, 10 years ago, there wouldn't be all the extra homes that one of the gentlemen was talking
Correct.
about.
And so you, generally speaking, when you review traffic collisions in terms of how it in terms of what you think is appropriate, 3 to 5 years is about 5 years is about as far back as you typically want to go in order to kind of have what we.
Okay, Tom. Pardon?
In terms of our trailer data, what did that tell you about this?
Actually showed this is, of course, it was only in the one direction in that section between Regency and El Toro. The speed information was quite interesting. It showed what Commissioner Carter was describing, that 85th percentile, the speed at which 85% of the cars are driving at or below. is exactly represented in this information that we have here. It shows that about 15% are driving above 35 and 85% are driving at 35 or below. So I think...
What type of speed range are you seeing, though? I mean, the 50% doesn't tell me much. What speed range are you seeing in the radar trailer?
Those who are not going the speed limit, what are they going?
Yeah, that's basically the question. If they're speeding, how fast are they going?
Just to give you an example here, what do we have, Brad? We had about 5,000 vehicles per day. Yeah, why don't you real quick there? That's your summary sheet there.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, when we look at the speed, you set parameters. So between, and get the vehicle limit here. So we have the total vehicles. Okay, let's get that because I'm not finding it. Between 35 and 45 miles per hour, you had 1,500 cars at 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. And at 45 miles an hour or higher, we had 26 vehicles. And that
Are in the street and they're flashing it, that people have a tendency to slow down? I know.
I think in the beginning, slow down, and then once they realize there's no consequences for speeding right by it, they probably, as they come back and forth, they might maintain the speed they normally drive.
Okay.
Just out of those numbers, you mentioned the 1,500. I think we had about 2,500 vehicles per day in that direction over a 4-day period, so that's 10,000 vehicles.
I got 8,500 vehicles that were at or under the limit.
Right, about 1,500 over. So that we're talking about those percentages. So when we say 1,500 driving between 35 and 45, that's 1,500 out of 10,000, or about 15%.
And if somebody's traveling 40, are you going to stop them?
Yes, you have the authority and the probable cause to stop them, but what citations are upheld in the court are a different matter. Generally, the courts will dismiss a cite if it's around 8 to 10 miles over the speed limit. So that's why we set that parameters at 10 miles an hour over at 45 to capture those vehicles, because generally anything within 8 miles an hour or so above the speed limit on a hill and things like that, most courts or commissioners in traffic court, they're going to dismiss that cite.
So let's with over. Now we're looking at those that were traveling over 45 miles per hour.
We had 27 vehicles in that 3-day time frame.
Out of 10,000?
Yes.
Interesting.
On the accidents, of those 6 accidents you had reported in that area, how many of them involved?
I don't have that information as the collision factors to those collisions in front of me.
Yeah, I did some research with the other database. It was a combination. We had some right-of-way violations. We had at least one where somebody was turning off Regency in front of an oncoming car, so you had a right-of-way violation there. Obviously, the Tesla we obviously believe to be a speed-related. The radar trailer, I think, was inattention and not speed. So I think I don't think, based on just the first cut at what we saw from collisions, we didn't see an overwhelming number of them related to speed. It seemed to be kind of a typical combination of things over an extended period of time, considering all the different intersections and conditions you have out there. But we will and need to dive deeper into that, extend the range, probably.
With respect to the homeowner who's had this problem with the car into his house or his property twice now.
3 times.
3 times? 3 times that is. Okay, thank you. Is there any common thread that caused those 3 accidents, or do we have any idea of why his particular property is so prone to get hit?
You look at the curvature of the roadway. You've got the combination of horizontal and vertical curvature there. Anyone traveling at a higher rate of speed is forces would tend to throw them towards that side, towards that particular house. So I don't think that we could certainly, without even seeing the collision reports, the reason somebody might be going down that hill and end up, in that wall or in that side yard or in this last case, in the garage, I think speed was most likely a contributing factor.
It's not because they want
At all.
I guess if that's the situation, what are our options to help them to protect that homeowner?
Generally speaking, the city constructs its roadways based on the standards that we have. And as we've discussed with the residents, you drive it in a reasonable and prudent manner, you're going to stay on that roadway. So vehicles that tend to leave the roadway tend to be driving in an unreasonable manner. We, generally speaking, do not put things on public property to protect private property. The private property owners are always allowed in many cases to provide protection if they think it's necessary. If we found a condition that was roadway related, if that roadway had curvature that was less than what we typically require, there were other unusual conditions out there, then you start to get into a realm where you might start looking at or discussing additional controls of some sort. But again, we haven't done the full analysis, but the curvature on a road, what we call a residential collector street, the speeds that we find in terms of our surveys, the typical curb gutter width of roadway control, all of those are very typical and are designed to carry cars at a slightly higher speed than residential streets. It seems to do so for the vast majority of people out there. If we have, you pick a number, if based on this lower reach, maybe we have 5,000 cars a day, multiply that out by 365, and you start to do the numbers, and pretty soon it's a pretty small percentage of vehicles that have left the roadway, and you can look for those primary collision factors involved here. So again, it's not out of the realm to look for ideas that, and I'll throw out the G word, like guardrails and things like that, but it would be unusual, to say the least, to even consider that in what we consider to be a residential environment.
So how many times would he have to have a car into his property before that became an unusual circumstance?
Again, there's parameters that we have that we use relative to collision history. I'll give you an example. When you're looking at, say, a stop sign at an intersection, you have what we call 5 correctable collisions in a 12-month period. That's a standard that we tend to look at and see a pattern and trend that may require something else. Just an example of something like that. But honestly, it would be typically something more than 3 over a 10-year period. I understand and appreciate the fact that it's damaged that same property 3 times, but I don't think at this point, based on my experience, that would rise to the level of the city going out and installing guardrails and other things in and around somebody's property.
Okay. I'm just trying to figure out, it just seems like it's kind of particular. It's prone to have that happen, so I was just curious what our option.
Hasn't honestly ruled out anything. That the whole point of tonight was to hear the residents speak. I've taken some fairly copious notes here. I know Chief Valentine has done so also. The idea was to hear from the residents, their concerns, some of their ideas, the commission's ideas, take all that back, go back and figure out what it is we think we need to do out there in terms of studies, and come back with some ideas and some suggestions.
Thank you.
Art?
Just a quick, Dave, and I don't know if you know the answer to this, but a Normandale-type street having 6 collisions in 3 years or whatever, compared to a similar type street anywhere in the state, or whatever you want to call it, would that be considered excessive? Is that less? I mean, is there a
collision rates and patterns? You can compare them to other areas, other cities, state standards. We haven't done a full analysis of that yet. My sense, again, if we're talking volumes in the thousands per day, 3 maybe as many as 5,000 vehicles a day on that stretch, 1 or 2 collisions during a 12-month period would not be unusual in my 30-plus years experience in dealing with it.
Have you considered stop signs like Matthews recommended?
We will certainly look at that. There is some.
Previously, have you considered them? I know that you're going to look into everything.
We're going to look into everything. I do not know. I've been here 2.5 years. I don't know what's happened prior to me. coming here. I know there was in the past, and Gail had some information on it because of her long tenure here, there's discussions of changing the roadways at one point. So I know this area's been looked at before in other ways. I do not have any information in our files that indicates that we've ever done any stop sign analysis at any intersection along Normandale between Osterman and El Toro.
Okay, I'm just going to go to Gail or staff for direction here. So we've heard from our residents, and I think yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't see. So
I'm thinking about what is our goal, and this is the first analysis we're doing, so we're kind of finding our way. And I want to conclude that the problem is speed. It isn't how many vehicles, it's those few that exercise excessive speed. And our duty is to sort of provide an element of safety and security for the residents and the other people driving on those streets. So I wanted to bring up the idea of if we were to consider a stop sign or stop signs, where do you think they might be placed? And what do you think the results would be of placing a stop sign in an area that you select?
In terms of area, knowing what I know about the conditions it typically takes to consider a stop sign, the only location along there that, in my opinion, would probably have the potential for it would be right at Regency. And it's primarily because of the volumes that are coming off Regency and on Normandale. So you're talking about balanced volumes in terms of whether you have equal volumes. And there's a lot of things that go into a stop sign analysis in terms of why it's needed, sight distance, and gaps in traffic to properly make turns, collision history. There's a lot of things we can look at. But again, just giving you my experience, typically on a little, what I'll call a typical minor residential side street, I know people don't want to hear their street, but a minor side street, stopping the major movement for a very small number of cars on a side street is typically not done and unlikely to meet any type of warrants or justifications that we typically use. So along that stretch, that's probably the one intersection that we will dial in on and do some analysis there to see whether or not it might be justified.
Okay. Would staff be opposed to a stop sign at that location?
Not if it met warrants or justifications.
Okay. By that, do you suspect it won't warrant a stop sign?
I have not done enough analysis to determine that. Again, I'm just giving you my, if anyone is even going to come close out there, it's going to be that location.
Okay. Quite a few years ago, Irvine had a problem, and that was, the name of the street escapes me. But one of the things they did is they took the AM peak hour and the PM peak hour, and they would send officers out there, and they would stop people for speeding. And they would, quote, take their time writing a ticket. So people passing by saying, ooh, this is a good spot to get a ticket. I know it works with me. Every time I see anybody pulled over receiving a ticket, I rethink what I'm doing. I'm usually not, I drive a Prius, so I don't usually speed. Maybe what we should consider is some enhanced enforcement at the time when there's the most traffic going through there, so people get the idea that if you're going to speed through there, you're going to get a ticket.
We do use that data, and we work closely with the Sheriff's Department to try and provide windows when it would be most efficient for them to be out there. And oftentimes it is the peak periods because people are in a hurry from one. It tends to be one of the more efficient times for the officers to be out there, both in terms of just pure volume as well as individuals that might be exceeding the speed limit to a point where they feel they need to pull them over. In addition, we work to try and coordinate the use of the trailers with the Sheriff's Department in terms of you roll the trailers out, it's almost like a warning to everybody, hey, we're paying attention, something's going on in the street, pull the trailers, Sheriff's Department's roll in behind there, kind of like, hey, if you didn't get it after a couple of days of looking at those trailers, perhaps it's time for you to pull over and have a conversation with an officer. So there are ways before driving.
Okay. Considering that traffic court commissioners are forgiving, I can see why there's not a resistance, but you don't want to do something and you don't obtain the result you want. But if we were not to think about that for a moment and just think about what is the psychological impact of people seeing police officers pulling speeders over and give them a ticket for a period of time, to see if maybe that straightens the problem out. Because we clearly have to do something. I mean, we all admit there's a problem there. So we have to do something, and it might be a combination of things, and those are my thoughts.
Thank you. So now I'm going to go to Gail. And I would just like to say that I know some of you probably have got some more thoughts and some more questions at this time, but unfortunately we closed that section of the meeting. But if you do have something burning, you can always contact Mr. Rogers at the city and give him maybe an additional idea that you thought of after we close the public portion of this particular item. So with that, Gil, I'd like to ask, now we've had our discussion, we've heard from the residents. What's next?
I think, Madam Chairman, the most appropriate action on the part of the Commission at this point would be to refer this to staff. As Mr. Rogers indicated, there's a number of studies that he can do, a number of things that have already been studied, but we need to have the right information and collect that, and to be able to assess whatever the Public Works and the Traffic Engineering staff would be recommending. We would bring that back to the Traffic Commission, but I think at this point in time we leave it to our traffic experts to analyze. They've certainly listened to the comments, and to go back and prepare a proper traffic analysis for consideration in the future.
That could take between 2 weeks and a year.
Right. We don't want to scare anybody, but and take our entire traffic engineering staff consists of me and a part-time consultant. So it will bring in other people where we need to, but at any given moment we're reviewing parking and other neighborhood issues, typically at 3 to 4 areas. Currently we're looking at 4 different areas. So our goal is to move each one forward a little bit every week and get to some point where we can bring information, if necessary, back to the Planning and Traffic Commission in this case. So,
and in the time that Valley is going to, as you're able to, put a force out there on that road to help maybe educate some of those fast residents that they probably shouldn't be going so fast.
And use of the radar trailers too, which obviously we had that one incident where somebody hit one, and we're hoping that's...
I bet they don't hit that again.
That's the one and only time I've seen it here, only time in my 30-year career that I ever see a radar trailer actually hit. Normally people react to it in a different way. But in this case, I think those 2 tools are the things we can put out there immediately to try and remind people of what we're expecting of them, and for those that don't get the message.
Could I make a suggestion that the traffic department and the police services come back in a month and tell us what your progress is and what your plan is at that point to go forward with this? To me, things that are reported on get worked on.
We certainly can. Again, I'm not sure how much we'll have done. We will have some things done. There's no doubt. The question is, will we have completed all of the studies we think are appropriate out there, and have hired consultants to come out and do some of the work. But we can certainly report back to you if you want formal reports, if you want something that along the lines of what we have, city council updates that we send to you individually. Certainly if we have representatives from the community that are leaders within that group and or the homeowners association, we can distribute through them. Whatever your desire is, we do.
I'm not here to tell you what method to use, but I just think we need some kind of report over the next maybe 2 to 3 months of how we're resolving this problem.
And we can certainly do that. Well, like I said, there'll be other issues that you're discussing. I'm sure we'll have other parking and or traffic safety related concerns that end up coming before you, and if we can kind of make that a typical thing, and we may end up having just a report at every, where we are these things, because they're going to come in at different times, and maybe that just becomes part of our normal routine. We'll just maybe a line item on the thing, just verbal update on any outstanding traffic and/or parking issues that either have come before you or you've had people come discuss it.
Well, I'm particularly interested to see how the traffic enforcement works over the next month, if that really makes a huge difference. My experience has been it works for a month or two after you do it, and then it stops because people go back to their old habits again. And then you end up coming back and doing it again. And so I'm curious to see how well this works and how effective it works over time. I guess that'll be one of the interesting things we could look at.
And just something from personal experience, so you guys know, and that
We should say that Commissioner Armando is a retired police officer from Huntington.
I was a motor officer for 10
Yes,
to 30.
so we
But
listen
anyway,
to him.
Typically, too, you may have somebody that's 5 miles over the speed limit. So you stop them, you talk up, you warn them, but the same effect is there. You've got somebody pulled over, people driving by. Somebody might have expired registration. Okay, they're not speeding, whatever. There are all sorts of things. The vehicle code's that thick that you could stop somebody, at least have a talk with them, and as people are driving by, everybody thinks you're stopping them for speeding, and that's fine. But again, just to have you pulled over and people get the idea, hey, they're enforcing this area, I better slow down, is quite effective too. So just so you know.
Anybody else?
May I just-
Sure.
I know there's no way to determine this, but it would be really interesting to find out how many people are using that area as a pass-through, coming from Lake Forest to El Toro. I don't know how we could determine that, or even come to some point of trying to ascertain how much cross-traffic we're getting through there, or is this something that's
What would you do with
right
that?
within? I don't know how you could do it.
What would you do with it?
It would be...
You have to have a passport to go
No,
through?
no. It's one of those things you want to ascertain whether or not it's outside the parameters of the neighborhood or within the neighborhood itself. The likelihood is most of your offenders are coming right within the confines of that area itself. People that are going down Pittsford at excessive speed, they aren't. And that's the one thing, that we're not able, I don't know how we could determine that. And that would determine where you
scanner.
put... Pardon?
Called a license plate scanner, and a lot of law enforcement has them now.
Sure, okay. But you'd have to know point A to point B. You'd have to track them through the deal, and that would be extremely difficult to do. But it would really be interesting if we were able to do that, to determine how much of development that's occurring in one part is adversely impacting in another part, which is the pass-through. And there you're able to ascertain, okay, where do your choke points have to be? How do you discourage them from using that as a pass-through? I think that's just the basic problem we've got in that area, is that a lot of people are going from El Toro to Lake Forest. They're bypassing all the stop signs along Trabuco, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't know if there's a way to discourage that more than having a gate that you have to go through from one end to the other. And I don't see how we could ever enforce that. But it would really be, to me, informative to determine how much of a true pass-through we're having going in that area. So if you can come up with an idea to figure that one out, I think that would be a solution that would be necessary in a lot of areas.
Thank you. One more?
Yeah, I have a comment on that. If we spent the money and the time to get an answer that you're interested in, I can't see how we can use the data. We may gather it, but then what do? We have to act on this problem, and just having the information doesn't do it. The other thing, we remind ourselves, those are public streets, and so everyone has an equal opportunity to drive on that street. So
all I'm saying is, if you can determine that it's being used as a pass-through, you make that pass-through just a little bit more...
Not so passy.
Less enticing to go through, okay? Whatever that is, whether you constrict the curves or the curbs, okay, to slow the traffic down, because one of the reasons people use a pass-through is because it's the fastest means. If you make it a longer, more arduous thing to get through, then they don't take it. then you only have to contend with the people that are living within the area itself, which is another problem that you have, because I know there's several of those streets in that area where we have residents on the street are exceeding, the residential, 25 miles per hour. But there's a lot of kids, there's a lot of parks and all that in the area, so it would be interesting to know it. How do you address it after you've got the information? I agree with you, it's a difficult thing at that point. But at least there you know what you're dealing with.
Okay. So, do we need a motion to ask staff to look into this? Are they already on it?
It's only a discussion item. I don't believe we need a motion.
Do you feel fully directed, Mr. Rogers?
I think we have more than sufficient information to proceed with.
Lieutenant Valentine, are you going to be on that street tomorrow? Somebody will be.
Somebody will be.
Okay.
Hopefully.
Yeah. All right. So with that, I would like to end discussion item 5 that is now 3. And I believe we have discussion 4 and discussion 3. And I'm going to ask if anybody is here for 4, which is the threshold. Okay. So, and is anybody here for discussion 3, which is discussion on parking policies and procedures? With that, I'd entertain a motion to move to discussion number 4.
Motion to do number 4.
I second it.
It's been moved and seconded. Let's vote. All right. So those of you that are 5 now 3, if you want to stay for the more exciting planning and traffic items, we're going to move on to discussion 4, which will remain 4. And that would, I turn it over to Gail then for parking impact thresholds.
Yes, this item has been agendized, discussion of parking permit impact thresholds. And Dave Rogers also has a short report this evening.
And before you do that, I'd just like to thank everybody for coming tonight. And I hope that you feel like you were listened to and we're on it.
Okay, Madam Chair, Commission members, members of the audience, real quick, this is a kind of an item coming back to you based on a public comment that you had at your first Planning and Traffic Commission meeting, as well as a discussion that the City Council had when they reviewed the residential traffic management policy, which is your other item tonight. So during those discussions, the issue of our impact threshold for our permit parking program was discussed. And at the first meeting, as I mentioned.
I'm sorry, Mr. Rogers. I'm going to interrupt you for a minute. If you guys have a discussion, we have a really beautiful lobby out there. I'm sure they're serving cocktails, so thank you.
So it was discussed at the City Council meeting. It was really not a topic for them to discuss at the time. That was kind of brought up organically when they were discussing the policies, the street sweeping, the permit parking, and the overall residential management policy. I went back and looked at the tape, and they did talk about changing the threshold. They talked about whether if you're adjacent to a permit parking area, should you not even have to have a threshold and just vote on it. So there was a lot of discussion about it. The point being, I think it was appropriate for the Planning and Traffic Commission to at least talk about it a little bit and see whether or not the council wants to have you continue that conversation. So in general, our permit parking policy was first introduced in 2004. The impact threshold is set at 75%, and what that really means is that when we go out and survey the streets, 3 out of every 4 available parking spaces would need to be occupied by someone who isn't from that neighborhood or is one of the residents within that neighborhood. That policy has been in place again since 2004. We have a total of 35 streets now that are part of permit parking programs, and in all cases they met that 75% threshold. In order to provide a basis for comparison, we provided you with some data that was collected by Doug Anderson, the consultant that works for me. He also works for Tustin. He actually did it for Tustin, so we're using their data. But we had a total of 10 Orange County cities that we have that have permit parking. Of those, 8 have a specific threshold that they deal with, and of those 8, 4 use 75%, 1 uses 70, 2 use 67, and 1 uses 50, which is actually the city of Tustin. The primary reason that the threshold is relatively high is that, we mentioned it earlier in our previous discussion here with the other items, these are public streets, maintained and operated with all of our tax dollars, and so taking away the right of the vast majority of people to use that street, park on that street, is something that needs to be considered very carefully and only done under what we consider to be extreme or unusual conditions. With the exception of the one city we talked about, the impact threshold is 67% or greater, and we think that reflects that consensus parking. In terms of what the staff is asking you to do tonight is simply kind of take public comment, if we have it tonight, but also to decide whether or not you think this is something that you, as part of your annual report to the City Council, that you'd like them to at least consider. Now, what that may entail is you may ask them to consider it, and they may then kick it back to you to come up with an answer to the question. But in order for you to get an understanding of how staff is thinking about this, we wanted to give you at least kind of 3 ways we're thinking about this. The first would be no change to the threshold. It's been in place for 13 years. It's been met by several neighborhoods. Every neighborhood can be reevaluated every 24 months. We can try and work with the neighborhood to try and find ways to maximize the impact. We've done that in an attempt to try and reach that threshold. So under the current policy, neighborhoods have met it, and we can certainly work with neighborhoods to try and see if they can do that. We've done multiple surveys in neighborhoods, even though by our policy we're only supposed to kind of do one, and if it doesn't work, it's okay, I'm sorry, but we're on to the next one. So staff has been fairly flexible in trying to implement the current threshold. So that's one of the things that if the council says, yeah, we think we want you to come back and think about this, that's an option. Don't change anything. You can say it's worked. Another one would be no change to the threshold, but provide some sort of an appeal process, some way that, and we haven't even kind of given the full thought, but is there some sort of conditions? I'll just kind of throw some example out there. If you had one single-family residential neighborhood literally surrounded by multifamily in some way, shape, or form, and we couldn't get the multifamilies to change a parking management program because they're not charging, which is illegal, but they're not charging, but it's causing an impact, and we somehow can't get them to maximize the use of their on-site spaces. Would that be a condition where we'd say, you know what, they're not doing their part? Is it fair for us to hold our residents to this high standard if they're not doing it? So I'm just using that as an example where you could hold the threshold and perhaps have circumstances where you might have a lower threshold. In staff's opinion, nothing below 67% would be appropriate, but that's current staff's opinion. So no change. Maybe leave it with no change, but have some sort of an appeal process down to some absolute minimum. Or, as we're kind of discussing in general, is it appropriate to consider just a different threshold, period? Whether it's 70 or 67, we have other cities, of course, that have used those other thresholds too. So the idea here is to have the Commission discuss this a little bit in terms of what do they think. Is 75 reasonable, yes or no? If it's not, is it something that you think you as a Commission would like to have the Council direct you to study? And if so, then we would add that to your annual report. And if the Council agrees, then that's when we would have the full discussion for perhaps implementing some changes as we're talking about here tonight. So really tonight, accept public input, perhaps have a discussion to think whether or not it's worthy of having the Council look at it to see whether or not they want you to study it further.
Thank you. We have one speaker tonight.
Hi, Parking Commission. Brad Muller, Lake Forest. Very much so, we should bring this down to 67% so that we can be more effective in, for example, my street hasn't been swept by the street sweeper in, 2 years. I know that the survey is necessary, but there's ways around the survey. If people find out about the survey, we're hit negatively in the survey for empty spots. I don't know, you drove down the street that everyone had an issue with before this meeting. I don't know if you've ever driven down my street. If you do, watch out for, tripping on particular trash or what have you left by, people who park there that maybe shouldn't. 72% actually is my street, 3% short. So no street sweeping, no accommodation for us at all. The apartment complex isn't helping, how should I say, they're just not being accommodating either. And if we can bring down the threshold or make special circumstances, yeah.
What's your street again?
Farthing and Stearns and Laurel Grove.
Just for the commission's information, Mr. Williams, who is another representative from the community, was the one that spoke at your first Planning and Traffic Commission, so he and Mr. Muller here are from that same neighborhood and have that continuing concern. And they are, we've done, included in the report, I didn't do it in the verbal report, but we've probably looked at 6 or more neighborhoods. We just finished one a couple of days ago. The typical results are in the 50% range. They're not even close to what the threshold that we set at 75%. This neighborhood, in my experience, is the only one, they literally came within 2% of that threshold, and I think that's part of what prompted staff to kind of have this conversation in general. In terms of, I'm sure, how it feels to the residents, the difference between 72 and 75 in the real world on the ground out there is nothing. It's imperceptible to them. So for them to have this situation where they're literally within a couple of percent of this threshold, I think I know for a fact has been very frustrating for them. So
Are there other streets in the same general area that did qualify at 75% next to
Farthing did.
Farthing?
Yeah, Farthing was what, 80?
in terms of individual streets,
That have parking, that have permitted parking?
nowhere else in this general part of the city has permit parking, no. But in terms of what our resident is describing is there's 3 streets, and part of the requirement is you have to have an X number of homes and so much frontage. And so we were trying to combine the 3 streets one way and look at them separately, and we just couldn't get there. And so
so you included Farthing, which qualified in your study for the whole area?
Just for Farthing is a very short. Farthing is the main street, the residential street, or that fronts both the apartments and is side on but front on to a few homes. So you had kind of a small portion of the neighborhood that met the threshold, but then the rest of it didn't. But you had to count all the streets together because that's how you only arrived at least 30 homes and 1,000 feet. So we tried to find every which way we could, and we ultimately just ended up at that.
And when did you do this study?
The last time, Brad. When's the last time we did it? 6 months ago?
Yeah, within 6 months.
Somewhere in that range, and that was the second round of studies to try and get us there. As I indicated in the report, we were trying to work with the neighborhood in some way. Normally, if you follow the policy, you do a study. The answer is no. 2 more years go by. We didn't wait 2 years. We wanted to look at it again because we thought they were so close. We were thinking, if we just look at it one more time, maybe we'll get there. We just didn't get there. So that's kind of where we're at right
everything, and I'm not going to stop. So, I mean, like, if I have to come here and ask you to drop the threshold because that's the way that the city's going to work it, that's great. I'll do that. And it's viable, and it should be done. But our
Do you think that let's say you were at 75% tomorrow, would your neighbors vote to?
We'll get the 67% required residents, yes, without a doubt. You'll get 100% if you want to up it as a qualification, and you can vote now to give us permanent parking. I'll bring them all to your next meeting.
Ooh.
So Dave, let me ask you this.
Before we do that, do you have anything more to say?
No, it's probably...
You did a great job,
okay.
and I think you got our attention. So does anybody, and this is not typical either, but does anybody have any questions of... So with that, I'm going to just ask that you sit down.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
So if we kept it at the 75% threshold, but added the special circumstances, the appeal process. For instance, in this case, even though it's 72% based on, hey, it's pretty close or whatever, if they had the appeal process, then we could go ahead and we or the city council or whatever could then say, yeah, we'll go ahead and grant that. In this case,
You had an appeal. If you created a threshold with some sort of an appeal process, and like I said, staff's opinion, down to some absolute minimum, I don't think it would be appropriate to have an appeal process that could get you down to 25%.
Okay.
It wouldn't make sense. But as long as they met the circumstances that the city established, then yes. And like I said, I haven't even had a chance to think them all through. But
Right.
the one that strikes me the most is, I'll call it uncooperative adjacent multifamily.
This would qualify for that?
In terms of what we've seen out there, and again, threshold, how many spaces are open at night, why are they open at night? The only thing we can hammer them on right now is if they're literally, I'll call it selling code-mandated parking. You're not allowed to do that. We've had an agreement with one community that was doing that, but there also are communities that manage their parking in such a way, without charge, but they manage it in such a way that it doesn't seem to us from staff to maximize the use of the on-site parking. So that could be one of those kinds of thresholds where if the city is, approached them this in some way to try and get them to do it, and they either refuse to do it or their program just doesn't work right, such that we see on a consistent basis a lot of available parking on site. Okay, is that a circumstance under which you'd go, yes, they're so close and we're just not getting the cooperation we need out of here? Maybe that would be the kind of circumstance. There may be others, but I'm saying that's typically the one we find is frustrating from a staff perspective, is that we're asking the multifamilies, please do everything you can to hopefully get every single space filled in the middle of the night. I mean, we survey at 3 in the morning and stuff, so there's no, they aren't home from... We do it when there absolutely should be the maximum, and we go out there and we find open parking spaces, and it's frustrating to us because we know for every open space that probably means there's somebody out on the street that could otherwise be in there. So that's just an example of a type of circumstance that I think you would get some support from the council or residents, and I think you could do it in such a way that you wouldn't end up, like I said, letting literally every neighborhood get permit parking for something like that. So I'm just, kind of doing that based on my experience here and elsewhere. But those are the kinds of things. It wouldn't just be, my street's a little longer than it should be. I get it wouldn't be minor exceptions that would create this. It would have to be a real condition that everyone would look at and say, I absolutely agree that would be a reason why you would consider a reduction.
So the question is, this wouldn't solve the street sweeping problem. If it was permit parking, if you're a resident and you have a permit, you can park there. That wouldn't solve the street sweeping problem. You would have to have it posted at noon on every other Tuesday or whatever. And that
wouldn't, in the sense that if the residents themselves still chose to park there. Generally speaking, I think if the residents, would be more likely to get their cars off the street because they want the benefit of the street sweeper. So, but if you have people from around the corner in the neighborhood, they have no connection to that property and therefore no sense of obligation to do that. So it would be up to the residents to do it. I suspect we'd get pretty good compliance without having to put up signs.
We're not asking for street sweeping signs. We're just asking.
No, you mentioned the street sweeping issue, and that is.
Get Brad in trouble if we would sign on your street, wouldn't we?
So, in your opinion, Dave, if this situation on Farthing, if you had that option available, you probably could have solved this problem?
Using the criteria or that kind of exception or that special condition that I'm describing, it's very likely that staff would have made a finding to that effect in this case.
Because to me, I think you're on the right track with that. I think to hold that 75% standard and nothing else, to me, seems extremely arbitrary. I suspect that most of the residents think of it that way, that this is just an arbitrary decision. Well, this city over here is at 67. Well, gee, I would have made it if it had been that way. I also understand your position that you don't want to get that standard too low, because then you've got to deal with it everywhere, and that's not good either.
Right. We don't consider that good public
Because right
policy.
now, I don't think, the 75% bars a lot of situations, potentially some situations that probably should be resolved, especially if it's close to uncooperative, like, say, apartment buildings and condos. I don't know if there's any other option that we can take legally, and I guess our council could tell us about that one, that we can use against private property owners who are basically taking advantage of the neighborhood.
Well, Vice Chair Ludden, there is, many of the cities in California ended up taking a look at permit parking because of an Attorney General's opinion that came out maybe about a year or so ago that said, permit parking shouldn't be distinguished between multifamily and single family. So I know that a lot of the communities are struggling with that in terms of figuring out how to, bring the multifamily into the permit parking system. And so, if there was consideration of how to implement this in, another trigger to be able to reconsider a neighborhood, our office should probably take a look at that as well to see how that new Attorney General's opinion should be, implemented. But having gone through the PMAC, and that's kind of the staff's internal parking management group, there's been many ideas on how to deal with private property owners. One being what Mr. Rogers referenced is that when there's a code requirement for parking, those shouldn't be leased out or rented. And so I think that's what Mr. Rogers was talking about. There's been looks at parking your garage and making that encouraging that. So there's a lot of different ways to encourage kind of private property owners' compliance with off-street parking. So we'd be happy to take a look at, if the Planning Commission was looking for another threshold to be able to appeal and look at how to, implement more permit parking under that threshold, we'd be happy to help with that.
I would think that's a good idea.
This just boggles my mind. Staff needs something to assist in a particular, incident, and we just don't have the vehicle there that allows them, or position to say it's beyond 75 or it doesn't meet 75, but there is condition here that warrants an additional look. And I think we ought to be able to give staff that opportunity to apply it if they can come up with the constraints within which they can work. It just puts something additional into the toolbox. It frustrates the devil out of the homeowner. I know that for it. It would drive me nuts. And I'm sure that it frustrates you to no end also, because there's an opportunity here to rectify a problem. So I think we've got to look at determining, is there an alternative that you can put into place where you have consideration that can be given where it doesn't meet the specific criteria of 75%. It just seems to be a no-brainer. If you can't turn right, back up and try to go at it just a little bit different direction. So I would be in favor of let's have some alternative concept come through to where if it doesn't meet the specific criteria, you have the opportunity to at least address the problem. That's what you need.
I have a question, Dave. So, in your experience, which is, 2.5 years now, what number of streets or areas do you feel would have that would have been similar to Brad? And I'm sorry, I don't know, Brad, I forgot your last name. Mr. Brad. That would be similar. Like if the threshold was 70%, how many neighborhoods would have qualified that came to us for help?
One.
The one that we're speaking of tonight?
Correct.
What if it were 67.5?
Still one.
Okay, so still one. So we're really only looking at one. And then I'm curious, if we wanted to look at one, if we wanted to do some kind of appeal, let's figure them out. Do we have to go through city council? Do we have to go through lawyers? What do we have to do?
Chairman and members of the Commission, Attorney Hung Dao, and I were talking about this, and I think we'll find that over the course of time, the Planning and Traffic Commission will be listening to a lot of concerns from different areas and different people, and I think at this point in time, we want to put this on our list. We'll soon be going to the City Council and then get the direction from that, because we'd be amending, correct me, Dave, we have a parking policy, it's a council-adopted policy, so we would want the council to specifically direct you to make that change. I think we're seeing good ideas, and Dave can certainly, be thinking about this, but I think at this point, we want to be able to go to the council as we do on an annual basis, and there could be 3 or 4 or 10 things that the commission feels should be looked at or amended, but the council would direct us at that point.
Well, I look at this as there's 2 things we can do as a direction to the City Council, that we could ask them to look at lowering the threshold, or we could ask for them to look at an appeals process. And is that kind of general consensus what we're looking at? And then, so let's go with the appeals process, since he only has 1 on the docket. Is that kind of general consensus? We'd like to add that to our direction to City Council.
So it would be keep it at the 75 percentile, but add the appeals process. That that's a possibility that somebody could appeal that.
Commissioner De Almeida, are you on board with the appeals process?
Actually, I favor reducing the threshold to 67.
I think you were outnumbered on that. You had 4 that are going for the appeal, but I'd love to hear your reasons why.
Thank you. As we understand, the problem is that we have single-family detached neighborhoods adjacent to higher density residential projects that perhaps didn't have adequate parking. And the problem exists, and it's not going to go away. So we have to, I think our obligation is to provide relief. And most of the alternatives, I'm not big on permit parking, but I can see in San Francisco and areas, Coronado, they have to have it. I mean, there's no other solution. Nothing else works. And I think that we have to think about what would be the easiest way of providing relief to these people. Also recognizing that the people that live in multifamily projects are also residents, and that these people are. So that problem is just going to go away. So I think the obligation of this group is to come up with an answer that works and proceed with that. And I favor the idea of reducing the threshold to 67%, and it would solve this problem for now. And then over time, we could see how it works.
I concur with you with one deal. I don't like pushing stuff down the road. If we're going to change the threshold, and you know that the threshold, you come up against it and it creates the same problem, you should have reduced the threshold as a recommendation, keep or reduce, but have the appeal process in place at the same time. So if you come up against this at 67, you have the same problem. You're going to be right back where we are right now, and there's no methodology to get through it. So why not take the time to move this one forward, ascertain whether or not the threshold should be lowered, but have the same appeal process considered for both. So I would be in favor of the 75%. Frankly, if I had 3 out of 4 vehicles in front of my house and only one was mine, I'd be upset terribly. Okay, it's a problem that's been created because the parking thing and the multi-family thing has not been addressed in years. It should have been addressed a long time ago. Okay, but I don't like the idea of pushing things down the road. So if we're going to change the threshold, let's go ahead and change the threshold, but let's put the thing on the back end to rectify the thing to where you have the opportunity, if you come up against that threshold again, that you can work through it. And I think this gives staff what they really need to do their job, and it's not going to go away. I don't think anybody's going to say we're going to have less vehicles on the road in 10 years than we do now. The vehicle is a part of our deal. So I would favor, let's reduce the threshold and add the appeal process to it.
Dave, I support those ideas. And I think that's the way. I also support the idea of let's not kick the can down the road. I think what the council is expecting of us is for us to grab the bull by the horns and make a decision, even if it isn't ideal, but to solve the problem.
One thing I'd like to point out here is that the City Council looked at this parking permit process just recently, and they kept the threshold at 75%. And I think the reason, I don't speak for them, but I believe the reason is that you might spell relief for those homeowners that are having a hard time finding a spot to park on their street. But there's also the relief that we have taxpayers that are paying for these streets and these roads, and by putting in permit parking, I think you have to be very, very careful, because these are public roads. These are not private roads. If you want private streets, then buy into a private street. Granted, I think in the case of Mr. Brad that, it's an interesting situation where the multifamilies and the single families have just kind of gotten too big around each other. But golly, be very, very careful when you start lowering thresholds and you start taking away my rights as a property owner to park anywhere I want on streets that I pay for. So I would like to just suggest to the City Council that they look at the appeals process, because as you said, you drop it to 67, and he said we're not finding a problem at 67. We're not finding a problem at 70%. We're finding one problem at 72%. So why are we going to drop it when there's no problem? Except for then I'm mad because you're taking away my city streets. And I think legally that just opens up a whole new can of worms with what the Attorney General passed down to us, if I'm not correct.
The Attorney General opinion, Chair Fuentes, really just put out that cities and agencies have to treat the multifamily and single family on the same footing. And so, permit parking couldn't exclusively go to single family at the exclusion of multifamily. So it has been a challenge for, cities that we've worked with, including Lake Forest, because that typically hasn't been, the parking permit solution. It has actually normally been single family at the exclusion of multifamily. So, in this new world we're living in, it would have to be a more integrated system and not necessarily exclusive. And so it is a challenge, and a challenge for other cities as well, as how to integrate this permit parking system more widely.
Yeah, that's the thing I don't understand about the permit parking. What happens to the folks that got displaced because they no longer have the permit to park where they were able to park before? You really, you either have to tell them to put it inside the garage and all the junk's got to get out of the garage and put your car in the carport or the garage that's full of other stuff, okay, which is probably the remedy to a good percentage of it. But, you put the shoe on the other foot. If we were using the apartment complexes to park our cars in there, they would understand what the impact is. There's no impact on them at this point in time, okay? But it's a shoe on the foot that you'll never have to deal with, but it's one of those issues we have. The unfortunate thing is when we do development agreements or when we're looking at sites for commercial development, we always put a caveat in there that if they have a parking problem, we have to bring it back to the commission to address the problem. That doesn't exist in the apartment world or the multi-unit development world. We haven't taken the time to put that into the development process. They've already been done. It's already out there. It's a problem that was created a long time ago. So,
well, we do put it in now with the new HOAs. We have garage
you do
requirements.
it in the HOAs, but the apartment complexes to the best of my knowledge, well, we haven't had any.
We haven't had any
that
come in,
We haven't
so.
had any come through.
Yeah.
Okay, we were
Tom had
looking at it-
something.
We started looking at it almost 3 years ago. It was on a radar to.
Well, we've actually had two apartments,
Have we?
and we typically put on the conditions that call for, we call it a parking management plan. So we address it, and we empower the homeowners association and them to solve parking problems. They typically agree to do garage inspections and other things. So we have, but most of the problems, most of the areas in the city where we're experiencing these problems, were all developed under the county, and we
Correct.
don't have that.
Correct.
And then if I could also add, we just had another late speaker card turned in on this item up to the commission as to if you'd like to hear from.
Okay, I'm going to hear from
additional-
Tom, and then we'll take the next speaker.
Well, I agree with most of what I've heard. I think the other thing that I see on the horizon that makes it more complicated now is we're building much higher density housing, even in the new tracks. Even in single family, we're building much higher density than we used to. I mean, you're building a 3-story house at 3,000 square feet on half the property. You used to build property on that size where you had more parking in front. To me, that creates a potential problem going forward too, because you don't have as much space to put them. I mean, so if we ignore this problem, we're going to have the same problem in the new developments, even though we have parking garage restrictions and stuff. There's just not that much property out there to deal with. We're cramming more people into a lot less square footage. So I think it is important that we deal with this issue because it will continue to come.
It doesn't, I don't mind putting in the recommendation or the suggestion to reduce or look at it. Okay? It's council's decision to make. Okay? They're asking us what our input would be. So somehow, it's not passing the buck, but at least I've done what I think is necessary to do. And I'm not adverse to asking them to consider doing that. We're asking them to consider doing it. That's what we're asking them to do.
Okay, we have one more speaker that I will agree to take, and then we'll come back to maybe consensus.
Hi, I'll make it real quick, and I really appreciate the debate I'm hearing tonight. Thank you so much. I know right now...
Your name
Oh, I'm
is-
sorry. My name is Vicki Davis. I am a resident of Lake Forest. We've been up here before. It's more of the Palmwood, Peachwood issues that we've been discussing in the past. What I appreciate in terms of the debate, in terms of the percent and the appeals is great. And there's one thing I wanted to put out there as one more thing to think about, and it ties in with Mr. Loon's aspect of the high-rise complexes, is that my understanding today of the apartments, the rental units, the capacity of people that can be in a 1,200 square foot unit can be at least 30 people or below. When you start putting a lot of people into one rental unit, which is supported by the state, you have a lot of cars. It tends to impact the parking, it impacts the safety of the community, and it also can tie into the speeding issues that we're also seeing coming in and out of the communities. So as you're debating, I wanted to throw that out, is not to forget that a lot of these apartment complexes that are around us, they also too have permits to park in those spots. They manage those permits. Sometimes they'll only give them to them 3 times out of the month, but they do have the permits. And a lot of these rental communities also have the garages that are stocked full of stuff too. So I wanted to plant that part. Rental units are allowing a lot of families into one unit, is my understanding through the state law. So that's also something to think in mind as you're going through the debate. Thank you so much for letting me come up, present that one more element of data.
Thank you very much. Okay, so previously I thought we had consensus to look at, to suggest to the city council that we have them look at an appeal process for this, based on what I thought was more what Dave Rogers had in mind. Did you feel that we need to reduce the threshold?
I don't know if you need to be at this moment actually overly specific with the council in terms of what the end solution is. I think honestly my sense is, yeah, we think maybe that hard 75 maybe just isn't appropriate for our community at this time, maybe as it was back in 2004 when it was first set. I don't know if you need to come with a specific, it needs to be this, this, and this. To me, it feels more like, hey, council, we think that hard 75 needs to be looked at, and maybe here's a couple of things that we're looking at in terms of it, but we haven't come to a final answer on it. We're asking you, do you think it's worth us to look at it? If so, it comes back. Then you can have that full discussion and come to a final conclusion, which then ultimately the council would have to, approve to amend the policy that they had adopted.
So, Brett, I don't think you're going to get this next week. This is not going to happen next week because it's going to have to go to the council, then back to us, and
I thought the city council empowered you to make these decisions.
kind of. But they were elected by the citizens to make the decisions, and I just want you to understand that the whole process is that we look at it, and then we have to recommend to the city council, hey, you need to look at this again. And then they can decide what they want. They can send it back to us, and then we can send it back to them. Hopefully, we'll make a decision at some point, but it's not tomorrow.
I understood, I heard meeting, when is that?
This is January. We go to January, February. We go to the city council with our recommendations on what we see that we'd like to see them look at in the next year.
So you can't make any decisions.
We weren't elected by you. We were appointed, and so we probably shouldn't be having a dialogue like this. I'm kind of really taking.
I appreciate it though, because we're just the whole place. So it's just, can you put it on their next agenda?
Once a year, the Planning Commission and the Park and Recreation Commission makes a report to the City Council, and each of the bodies recommends what studies they would like the council to authorize them to work at. They may recommend 6 things or a dozen things, but that's the process we have in place. The council put that in place about 2 years ago, and we will be going to the council in the early meetings in January with a whole list of recommended studies, and the council will say, yes, please move forward on these. Some of the studies require funding, so the council has not empowered the commission to take on anything, and they have a very limited budget. So this will be on the list.
I think we have consensus that it would be on the list to look at it again, City Council.
Yes, that's
Do we
correct.
have consensus? All right.
I got some thoughts. I thought the council placed the burden on us to look at these problems, to analyze them, and to produce solutions. And we have a problem, and there's no neat little answers for that problem, but I think we should address it head on, and I would hate to have this commission come up with a wishy-washy response. I'd like to see an up and down vote. I'd like to see a debate, discussion as to what is the preferred solution. We reach an agreement, and we push it upstairs, and we did our job.
Well, it's a discussion item. It's not an agenda item. So I don't think we cannot take a vote on it tonight. I would turn to City Attorney to reiterate again what they told us with regards to what our budget is and what our limitations are, if you'd like to hear that again.
I'm sorry, I'd point out, too, from staff's perspective, we haven't flushed out any of...
That was mine.
These special conditions might be, which I think if you really want to get all the way down into the weeds, you're going to need that information. And we haven't even developed that for you to... You may come back and go, I don't like any of those those conditions. I don't think any of them justify or warrant reducing it. So we don't have enough information in front of you, I think, from staff's perspective, to throw this one out, pick this one, set a percentage, all that right now. Really what staff was looking to do is, do you, as the commission, think this is an issue that should be studied, and you're going to ask the council to allow you to study?
That's the way that
That's the way it's currently set up, how the council set up.
We don't tell staff what to do outside of our realm, and the city council dictates to us what we can and cannot do.
We don't have anything to make a decision on tonight. That's apparent. That
And we're not. It's not an agenda item. It's a discussion.
It's not an agenda item, but we've got 3 options that we were asked to look at. And I think we've added a fourth option that we would like to suggest that you take back. Consider reducing and placing an appeal. That is an action item. That gives them direction as to where the commission's going to. And if they're able to turn it around and get it back to us with specifics, then we can operate and, deal.
And I would just correct that, Dave. I think what Dave Rogers said is just send it back to the council and say, look at this again. Do you want us to look at this again? Because I don't think we've agreed lowering the threshold is what we want to say to the council at this point. I didn't agree to that, and I only heard the two of you. So, again, we're not going to take a vote, but I think we can generally say, council, we've got a group of homes, and they're desperate, and we want to help them. Please take a look at the parking permit program again. Give us some direction. Isn't that what you said?
Basically, my sense is we think the hard 75 is probably not appropriate for the current conditions that we're seeing in our permit parking program. The Planning and Traffic Commission, on behalf of the City Council, would like to look at alternatives to that hard 75. And if the council says, we agree, please look at it and come back to us with a recommendation, then we bring it back with all those details, all that full discussion, and you end up at some place where you come back with them, and then you would say, please amend the policy to do this. But right now, we believe the hard 75 is no longer appropriate for our community as a whole. Will you allow us to study that and come back with recommendations, yes or no?
Well, I think, too, if we're careful on what we send back to them, we don't send them too many things, we have a much higher chance of getting them approved, because if we go to the list 50 things, only 10 of them are going to get approved. So I'd rather go with 10 and know we win than have 20 or 30 and have to guess which ones they pick. I mean, that's kind of where I am, because they got limited time, they got limited funds, and we got to make sure we work on the stuff that really counts.
Okay, so can we have consensus that what Mr. Rogers just suggested that we send to council? Would everybody agree?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, if we would restate it.
Well, I think it's. Do you need it restated for a purpose?
Well, yeah, if I'm going to vote on it.
We're not voting. It's a consensus. He said it a couple times that we're just going to.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So, is there any more discussion on permit parking impact threshold? Okay, hearing none, we're going to go to item number 3, which is now item number 5, which is discussion of parking policies and procedures.
And Dave Rogers also has a short report this evening.
Lucky Dave.
Strike 3. Here we go. This is one of your educational items tonight. Obviously, as I mentioned on your previous discussion with Normandale, that was kind of a mini discussion on how we handle the other side of the coin, which is traffic safety concerns. This, you've already seen, of course, because you made and gave recommendations to the council, which adopted, on this particular manual. This is really more about providing you with information that you can use. We hope you keep the manual and the permit parking policy and the street sweeping policy something that you can reference. You will always have us as professional staff here to help you and support you in any way and get into all the details, but as long as you have an understanding of how this works. The manual came out of hard work from staff as well as the commission and ultimately the council to try and create a process that we apply uniformly to these types of parking requests. And it's a tiered program. We start out with some of the simplest things, whether it's, sometimes there's issues with trash or abandoned vehicles, things like that. So we have the low-hanging fruit, Tier 1, within our policy here that helps us kind of address those things. And then it's just an iterative process to kind of move through that as we're addressing the issues. If we address everything in Tier 1, we're done. If we need to go to Tier 2, we do. Tier 3 is where you start to get into things where the Planning and Traffic Commission will get involved on a regular basis. Typically, street sweeping restrictions and the permit parking restrictions would be the two that would always come through you, even if the process goes straight to staff. If we find ourselves at that Tier 3, we're going to end up coming back through the Commission and ultimately the Council to approve some of those things. So Again, this is just kind of presenting it back to you. This is a big issue here in the community. Just tonight you saw 90% of what we get from the community in terms of concerns. Parking issues and traffic safety issues primarily in residential areas. And we spend a lot of time on other things, projects and signal coordination, but in terms of what we hear from the community, tonight you have heard the two biggest things that we deal with on a regular basis. And then, as I indicated, we are currently working on, I think, 4 different neighborhoods for different issues. So that's what we're juggling. So for you to be versant on, to some degree, of what and how we respond to this will help us as staff, because I know as commissioners you get approached by the community, hey, what are you going to do about that? And the ability to be able to say, we have a process in place, you can go find it on our website, contact our staff, we can do that. So to have this in a way that everyone can understand it and follow it is very important and helpful from a staff's perspective. So the residential parking manual is just what I described in very broad terms. It's just a series of steps that we hope to address specific issues that we have that come up on a regular basis, whether it's problems with vehicles being abandoned or trash in the area, all of those things. Sight distance is another one. You get a lot of people parking right up to corners, people can't see. Some of those we can address very easily with red curb or parking restrictions. So all of those are contained in there, and again, it's kind of a tiered process to get us to where we want to go in terms of addressing the residents' concerns. So within that, of course, we just had a long discussion about permit parking policy. That is in Tier 3. It gets us through that. It's a very detailed program right now, and again, reserved for those areas that are experiencing those conditions that we just described. Currently, 75% is the threshold. It has to impact a certain area, and ultimately the residents, actually, let me step back, the property owners have to vote on whether or not they want it to be imposed on their neighborhood. So it's a process that you have to go through there, but again, we've discussed that at length just with this last discussion we had. The third area is our street sweeping policy. We haven't really talked about that much. We have a policy for that. The threshold is much lower because we look at it not only as an impact to the neighborhood, but also a water quality issue. So here you're talking about a threshold of it's 25%, but we also want to make sure that we as a city don't go in and impose that on neighborhoods. We think we'd like to give the neighborhoods an opportunity to do the right thing voluntarily and stay off the streets during street sweeping. As many times, people don't even know when their streets are swept. So sometimes just informational letters that we send out after we get a concern about it can go a long way to kind of addressing those concerns. But if we find ourselves in a situation where the impact is significant and we have the majority of people, either through their HOA or through a petition, have said, hey, we think we need this in our neighborhood, we will go through this process that's described in here to see whether or not we think it's appropriate. The city itself currently is actually considering one on a street when it's not residential frontage, it's a collector street. Picture Normandale, we just described that, where you have cars out there from multiple complexes in multiple areas. The city itself, if we find conditions are appropriate, we can go out there and actually do it on our own without requiring any support from the community. But we have to be very careful because, as with anything, permit parking, others, it has the potential to displace vehicles and move them somewhere else, and we try to avoid doing that. Some of the ideas we use, particularly on non-residential streets, is alternate side sweeping. And try and confine the sweeping to the middle of the day, so you're not impacting someone who's just come home or somebody who hasn't left for work yet. So we have tools that we can try to do that to avoid that just moving of vehicles to another area. So again, that's all contained in the policy. Again, just hope you have it. It's a reference document for you. Some basic understanding of it will help you in your interactions with the community and help us from a staff's perspective in terms of being consistent with what we tell the community as a whole. In terms of, I'm going to pass it over to Chief Valentine here in a second. We talk a little bit in here about some of the other things. We have our Lake Forest Municipal Code, which helps us with parking enforcement issues. We also have the California Vehicle Code, which is also parking enforcement. Some of the things that we get the most requests for, The three that we get the most for is parking for extended periods of time. We call it the 72-hour rule. We've got oversized vehicle parking, commercial vehicle parking. We get a lot of concerns about that. And finally, we get a lot of concerns about what they call inoperable vehicles. People believe they're inoperable, therefore we need to act on them. In terms of how you enforce it and the limitations associated with that enforcement and aligning expectations with reality, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Valentine to kind of give you the understanding of how they have to deal with this and some of the constraints they face, as well as some of the good things the council did at your recommendation relative to enforcement. So, Brad, I'll turn it over to you.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, so what I'd like to do is I'm just going to go run through some basic things, some common enforcement issues that we have and problems that we have, and misperceptions by the residents and things like that, and then I'd be happy to answer any questions when I'm done. One is just louder than the one I'm used to. So the 72-hour towing authority is something that is a common and probably one of the most prevalent complaints we get of cars being parked in an area over 72 hours. The 72-hour towing authority is set in the California Vehicle Code, and it's a law enforcement tool that's used at the discretion of the deputy, SSO or CSO, any sheriff's personnel, in handling aggravated parking situations. Its primary function is to prevent the use of public streets for long storage of vehicles that are not moved on a regular basis. That's key, right? Towing vehicles for this violation is not mandatory per sheriff's policy and should only be done after a citation or a warning has been issued and the vehicle has not moved. So typically within the sheriff's department, we get a call from a resident. We go out there, we'll mark the car, either with a warning tag on the windshield. We'll mark the tires in many different fashions. Sometimes it's a visible mark with chalk on the street and everybody sees it. Sometimes there's people that move those cars around all the time and it's just a penny on the tire that the CSOs communicate with each other, right? So when we go back in 72 hours, we know whether that car is moved or not, okay? In the old days, when all the odometers were present and visible, you could write down the odometers, but most cars these days are digital odometers, so you don't know if the car is moved or not unless you mark it. So, moreover, sheriff's personnel are expected to make contact with the registered owner or responsible party of these vehicles. If this can't be accomplished, then we try to talk to at least two residents on that street to determine, does this car belong here? Whose is it? Is the person on a vacation or extended weekend? We take it very seriously if we're going to remove a vehicle because that's somebody's property. So the sheriff tends to err more on the side of caution as a policy. So even though you're at 72 hours, it doesn't mean it gets towed right away. Okay? I'll go a little bit more into that. Another part of this policy is the sheriff's department must avoid becoming involved in neighborhood disputes. Okay? We have that all the time. People don't like others parking in front of their house, even if it's their own neighbor. So you get into some neighborhood disputes, and then they call the sheriff's department, and we're there trying to enforce one neighbor's will over another, even though the car's technically legally parked. So even though it might be a valid 72-hour citation, depending on the circumstances, a tow might not be appropriate. Okay? Let's see here. So the 72-hour period doesn't start until sheriff's personnel get out to the scene. So this is a big educational thing now that we've added to the OWL system and our general response to residents, that they might call the sheriff's department after the car's been there a week or two and they want immediate action. Well, for many reasons, that 72-hour period doesn't start until our personnel are on scene, they warn it, and they mark it. One is so they can testify in the court that they've witnessed that this vehicle has been there for 72 hours. And then if there's an appeal process and that somebody's trying to get reimbursed for the storage fees because they think we towed their vehicle and we shouldn't have, if we're just going off, well, the resident said it was here for a week, so we towed it, and that appeal process ends up determining that, okay, Sheriff's Department erred, now the Sheriff's Department and the city are on the hook for those. So for those reasons and several others is why that 72-hour period starts, so the officer can attest and testify to the fact that they marked it and they witnessed it and they know it hasn't moved in 72 hours. And in most cases, before we tow it, you're looking at not 72 hours, you're looking at usually anywhere from 6 to 9 days before that vehicle is actually towed. After it's given a warning, given a citation, and then we move to towing. So another problem we have, we go out, we'll mark a vehicle, and then sometime during that 72-hour period, that vehicle is moved. Maybe it only moves a few feet. Maybe it moves to the other side of the street, and it's kind of a game that's played, right? Unfortunately, the vehicle code doesn't allow us to justify that. So in trying to enforce the vehicle code and the authority that the Sheriff's Department has, we have to follow those directions. So if it moves, it's no longer considered abandoned, and that whole timeline starts all over again. And once again, that's why we talk to residents, talk to neighbors. The whole point is to determine, is this car abandoned, or is it, if it's a long-term parking issue, remember you have to go back to that's not moved on a regular basis. So if they're moving it every 72 hours, or even every 100 hours, by the time we're out there marking it and following up on it, the car is being regularly moved, so we have no authority to take action in that regard. So I'm going to move on a little bit to abandoned vehicles and inoperable vehicles. The California Vehicle Code defines motor vehicles that are parked, resting, or otherwise immobilized on any highway or public right-of-way which lack an engine, transmission, wheels, tires, doors, windshield, or any other part or equipment necessary to operate safely on a public street. So a lot of times, those are pretty significant pieces of equipment that, for the most part, are going to be pretty obvious if they're missing. If a lot of times we'll get complaints that, hey, that car, that the owners have to push that car back and forth to move it every 72 hours, it's inoperable. Well, for us, we'll go out there and look at it, unless it's got one of these obvious conditions. If the vehicle is just in a state of disrepair and they don't have the funds to repair it, but it's got all these components, we have no authority to remove that vehicle. So that's another frustrating thing that takes time, and we're happy to do it to educate the residents and the public on these type of things. So that's another thing that we have standard response on the ALF system, that we don't just answer that system and say, okay, we'll send sheriff's personnel to that area. We try to answer it with that and then a little educational piece of what we can and can't do. So for the most part, parking enforcement in this city is complaint driven. In other words, a resident needs to either call sheriff's dispatch and report a parking problem, or they're going to submit a claim, like a complaint, through the ALF system. Everybody's familiar with the ALF system, correct? Dispatch is more immediate. The ALF system sometimes takes days to get a response, because if they submit it on a Friday night, nobody's looking at that again until Monday morning. So those are generally the ways that parking is handled. We currently have 4 CSOs, Sheriff's Community Service Officers, that are assigned to the city. They have a staggered shift, so basically from about 6 a.m. to 2 in the morning, 7 days a week, we have a CSO on duty. Now, deputy sheriffs can handle parking issues, and they do at times, but generally those calls for service are held for the CSO, so the deputies can handle the more pressing matters, right? So the workload of a CSO is prioritized and each call is given a priority for dispatch, right? A traffic collision with injuries would have a higher priority over a parked vehicle. Everybody understand that? A traffic hazard, if there is a tire in the roadway or a box in the roadway, that's going to take higher priority than a parked vehicle. So in essence, a parking violation, a parking vehicle, illegally parked vehicle, an abandoned vehicle, those are the lowest priority type call for the Sheriff's Department. It's not a high priority call. It's not causing a traffic hazard. It's parked. It's just a nuisance in essence to somebody. In addition to that, we do have proactive parking enforcement as time allows for the CSOs. If they're not on a traffic collision, if they're not doing a traffic collision investigation, doing follow-up work, if they're not dealing with traffic hazards, if they're not writing reports that have to be done on those traffic collisions, the goal is to balance that so you're doing a little bit of both, a little bit of all of that every shift. But it doesn't lead to a lot of time of proactive, dedicated parking enforcement. So what the City Council has done in this last budget cycle, they have added a 5th CSO position, and that position has been directed to be parking enforcement. They'll say parking enforcement only, but the Sheriff's Department can't mandate that because the CSO classification is traffic collision as well. But we're going to tweak it and make it more like your primary duty is parking enforcement, and if the other CSO is on a collision and another collision, both of them will handle it together, but they won't be broken away from parking enforcement to handle those other things. Everybody understand that? The problem is trying to get that person hired. The Sheriff's Department has an extensive background process, whether you're a sworn employee or a non-sworn employee. The goal is to try to have that position filled within a few months, but getting qualified people through the background process has not proven fortunate for us in the city of Lake Forest. So the goal hopefully is to have this position filled by the end of the year so we can institute this. Once I have the third vehicle, that's an issue, right? Part of the contract was getting a third vehicle out there to do parking enforcement. My plan is to start hiring people on overtime to be out there doing proactive parking enforcement for 4-hour, 8-hour shifts or whatever until we can get it filled full time. But right now, I don't even have a vehicle to do that. So those are some of the challenges. Those are things how the sheriff handles calls for service, the priority level, the common misperceptions, and what our restraints and authority are within the California Vehicle Code, the Muni Code, and things like that. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions and go from there.
Just real quick, the 72-hour violation, you try and follow up. Let's say it's on a, not in a residential section, but you marked it, it's on a feeder street or something, and you say you follow up with the resident. Well, let's say it comes back registered to somebody in Riverside. You won't be following up with the resident and something like that. You'll just,
no.
Okay.
It's generally on a vehicle like that, most vehicles are going to be marked and warned to begin with. But when you get into the residential streets or things like that, we're going to contact the residents and find out what's going on, right? We're trying to seek voluntary compliance. Some areas are more over-impacted than others. Some neighborhoods have those disputes that never go away. But we try to seek voluntary compliance and find out why the vehicle's parked there for long-term to begin with, before we start issuing citations and ultimately towing a vehicle.
Just real quick on that, is there a policy, 226510, the one where you can tow a vehicle that's expired registration over 6 months? Does the Sheriff's Department have some kind of policy that it has to be a year, it's got to be 8 months, or if somebody calls and says, hey, there's this car and it's got expired registration 7 months, and you gets out there, runs it, and it's, yes, it expired 7 months, they don't have a policy against towing that, they'll tow it?
Sheriff's Department does not have a violation or a policy for that vehicle code. So To educate the commission a little bit, there's a vehicle code section that applies to expired registration. So if you're supposed to pay your vehicle registration in January, and now 6 months later, it's, June 1st in one day, that vehicle can be removed from the roadway because it's expired over 6 months. The Sheriff's Department policy is we enforce that at 6 months. So even if that vehicle is driving down the roadway, you can make a car stop and yank that car. So obviously there's circumstances there. Who's in the car? What, we're not going to leave a woman and a baby stranded on the side of the road if it's expired, but then the officer has that option to cite it to make her go back to court and fix that, or go to the DMV and register it, and then let her still drive off because you don't want to leave somebody stranded on the roadway. So lots of options that we can take, but that's what you're referring to.
And then just for a CSO is a civilian. So with regards to a traffic collision, 40600, the citing at the scene of a collision, you got a witness and they can have a violation. They can't do that. They would have to go via complaint, correct?
That is correct. Okay. Our CSOs, they only issue parking citations, not moving violations or violations for collision factors within a collision. The way the Sheriff's Department is set up, we have a regional traffic office that's located at the Aliso Viejo substation. It serves all of South County, North County, all the contract cities. Basic traffic investigation, they will write their report. That report is sent to the traffic office. They review it. The CSO's recommendations for a citation, and after that report is reviewed by a deputy or investigator, then they turn around and write that citation and mail it off based on the collision factors and the whole totality of circumstances.
Right. Okay. And then do they investigate injury traffic collisions, or if it's serious, fatality, they would have a policy on that?
There are many procedures here, so bear with me for a second. A CSO is non-sworn, so all they carry is pepper spray. They don't carry a gun, but they handle injury and non-injury collisions for basic, right? Once we cross that threshold where we might have major property damage or major injury, we would call out what is called the MART team, the Major Accident Reconstruction Team. And that is a team of deputies investigators that will come out. Most of the time they're out handling the fatalities. That goes beyond the basic scope of a CSO. A CSO is basic traffic collision and investigation. So once you get into significant injury and fatalities, then you call in what you say the experts. They bring out mapping equipment and all sort of things, and they do a whole technical report on that to handle those type of collisions.
So the one on Normandale with the Tesla, even though it was minor injuries and they had a DUI involved, obviously you'd have to have a deputy involved in that portion of it. But
right.
would something like that be handled by a CSO?
Initially that incident was handled by a CSO, the traffic collision side of it, and then the criminal side of it with the DUI was separated, and the deputy sheriff would handle that side, and then the two reports would be married together when they're completed. Another avenue is hit and run collisions. If it's a cold, stale hit and run that's happened and there's no suspect contact or suspect information potentially, then the CSO would handle that. If it's a hit and run collision that just occurred, you're going to send a CSO and a deputy. So the deputy is there to make suspect contact while the CSO is taking the basic traffic collision report. So it's kind of a dual partnership there as you separate traffic and criminal activity.
Great, thanks.
Does anybody have any questions? Very thorough.
And I'd just like to add that police services is available at any time. If anybody has a question, you can call my office and talk to myself or Sergeant Keller or even the administrative deputy, Deputy McLennan. Happy to answer any questions with you and discuss it.
Robert?
I have a question. That's a very extensive explanation, very helpful for us. I understand on the 72-hour, listening to you, that's extensive use of personnel time to work those out. The idea of posting a warning is cost-effective, I think. And then, is it possible to just write a citation for that and not tow the vehicle away?
Yes. Generally, what we do, kind of the system we've developed is we have a digital log sheet. So the CSOs have the mobile data computers within their car. And they can pull up what we call a log sheet, right? And so when somebody marks and warns a vehicle at on a street, that 72-hour period begins. There's automatically a column there, so when the CSOs come on 3 days later, whether it's the same CSO or somebody on the other week that's working, because we work a 3/12 shift, they know to check that log and say, okay, if I have time today, I'm going to check and follow up on these vehicles that were marked 3 days ago. And when they get there, when the vehicle, that's the initial warning. Okay? And it's, got it right here. Generally, that's a nice bright yellow tab that goes on the car. Usually put it under the windshield. So they're hard to miss, but a lot of people do. And this information on here will have the date and time, what the violation is, and hey, this is a warning, we want you to move your car. So when we come back after that 72 hours, if the car hasn't been moved, depending on the circumstances, we'll either give another warning or something like that, or if it's a car registered at a Riverside or out of the area, that might warrant a citation right now. We try to leave that discretion with the officer at the scene instead of putting them in the corner where they have to take action A, B, and C. We prefer them to have that discretion. And that works for both sides. Now, if you've got a problem vehicle, it might be on a residential street, but you know that vehicle is bouncing around every 72 hours and it's a problem, then we might stop issuing the warning notices. We sought voluntary compliance. It's not working. Okay, now we're going to step up, and every 72 hours we're going to try to cite this vehicle. And then occasionally, depending on how you look at it, we get lucky and they fail to move it, and then we tow it. And then they go pull it out of the tow yard, and they put it right back on the street, or they put it somewhere else. But it's just that vicious cycle. So we try to leave that discretion with the officer in the field, if that answers your question, Commissioner.
Okay. Thank you very much. Questions to director's comments.
We sent out an email earlier. I just wanted to remind the commission there's a planning officials forum. It's for October the 5th. I've heard from a few commissioners. If you would like to attend, please send me an email. And we also have a new administrative specialist starting in October, so we will bring her to a meeting and you can meet her. Her name is Jennifer Weiss, and we're excited she'll be here, but thank you to Simone for filling in the meantime. That's all.
Okay, City Attorney?
No comment.
Planning Commission comments. I'd just like to thank Simone, too. You've been awesome. Thanks for putting up with us. And great staff report and discussion, and just thank you very much for everybody's input. Dave?
No comment.
I have one suggestion for staff. All these wonderful documents that have been showing up in our packet related to the traffic manual and that type of thing, could you put those on a CD-ROM or something so we could index those and get to them a little easier over time? Because right now you got to try and pull them out of the Dropbox, and that's kind of awkward.
We'll look at something. We'll find the best way to do that. We have a lot of technology.
Because that would be really helpful, because we'd like to back and refer to them, but right now the way we're getting them is pretty awkward to use.
Yeah, I think Dropbox may work. We'll try that. We'll come up with something.
Okay, thank you.
Mark?
No comment.
Dale, admit that you are last.
Yeah, the hour is long, and I'll save my comments.
All right, with that, we will adjourn till September 28th.